Do you like the backdrop, Jeff? Thank you.
Mr. Trunzo, you're free to proceed.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to call to order this virtual regular meeting of the Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission on Friday, May 14th, 2021. Usually we call the roll at this point, but Mr. Secretary, let's go to introduction of Mr. Ellison as a new member first, and then we'll get back to the roll. And even before I do that, for the benefit of all the speakers today, I want to read the list of speakers that we'll go to twice, I believe, for the new business item as well as general comments, so everybody knows where they are in the order. And I'll call this in order when we get to those points. So we have David Hutt, Carlton Savage, John Dewey, Tom Evans, Harvey Shulman, and Saurabh Srivastava. I hope I did justice to your name. Sorry if I didn't. Thank you, everyone. So today we have the pleasure of welcoming a new member to the Planning Commission, Mr. Jim Ellison. I'm very excited about Mr. Ellison joining the Planning Commission. We're happy to be headed towards having a person in every seat. And Mr. Ellison's experience, I think, is going to be very valuable to our mission. I've asked Mr. Ellison to take a few minutes to introduce himself to the PC and, of course, to the public who's watching. And then I'll turn to the PC, and I would ask all of you to do the same, and in any order is fine with me. Is that agreeable to everyone? Okay, I see shaking heads. Mr. Ellison.
Thank you, Jeff. Good afternoon. I'm new to all of this, but I'm looking forward to working with all of you. I'm a retired architect, way retired, I will say. My professional career was in Washington, D.C. My wife, Carol, and I have owned property, residential property and properties here in Rehoboth for over 40 years. We have lived here full-time approximately, what did I say here? About 17 years after both of us retired. I have served Rehoboth Beach. I was on the Streets and Transportation Committee for several years. I was also the only architect on the 2007 or 8 architectural review task force that was created. And of course, the final product of that is highly regarded, I would say, in our current CDP. I also served on the mayor's special task force on the City Hall complex. And the result of that, of course, is our new City Hall. Just outside of those things, I have been on the board of trustees of the Rehoboth Art League. I realize that's not directly in town, but I particularly appreciate the relationships now that are being established and are quite well established between the Art League and its activities and the city of Rehoboth. I also served as chair of the board for a term a couple of years back. I also presently serve as chairman of the Delaware State Review Board for Historic Preservation. So that certainly is enough to tell you a little bit about myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim, and welcome aboard. We're very happy to have you.
Thank you.
Ask just anyone to speak up, please.
I'll go, Jeff.
Thanks, Barry.
This is Barry Covington. Welcome, Jim. Nice to have you and your expertise on board. I am a full-time resident in Rehoboth Beach. Been here now full-time like 3 years. Been coming to Rehoboth Beach about 15, 16 years. My background is both in law and business. And this is my second year on the Planning Commission.
Thanks, Barry.
I'll jump in.
Thanks, Rachel.
Hi, this is Rachel. Jim, welcome to the Planning Commission. I have been on the Planning Commission for the last 2 years. I also serve on the Park, Shade and Tree Commission. I've been a resident here in Rehoboth for 23 years, living here full time for the last 3 to 4 years. I have 5 children. All 5 of my children started working in Rehoboth here in the summer since the age of 14. 9 years later, I still have 2 children that'll work here this summer. And they are just finishing their junior year in college. So a lot of history here in Rehoboth. I grew up coming here as a kid and just feel blessed that I can actually live here and have a place for my children to enjoy as well as they also now become young adults and finish school and start thinking about their careers. So welcome to the Planning Commission and look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Rachel. Next.
I'll jump in.
Thanks, Lee.
Welcome, Jim. I see you around. I know that you live on my street. This is the first time I've officially met you, but I do see you around. I grew up in Rehoboth, but have lived in the DC area for about the last 30 years. So I'm just a weekend resident now. I'm in the real estate development business and have been for about 35 years. I look forward to having your expertise on the Planning Commission from an architectural planning perspective. And welcome.
Lee, you were breaking up a little bit just for the future, so you know that. And I'll also add that Lee is currently serving as the secretary of the Planning Commission. Hey, Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll go. Jim, welcome. It's lovely to have you on the commission. I've been on the planning board for, I hate to say this, I'm now the oldest serving member of the planning board, coming up on 9 years. My background is rather eclectic. I've lived here in Rehoboth Beach for the last 16, 17 years and been a property owner for more than 30 years. My background is engineering and I have a PhD in urban planning. But I've applied my trade in healthcare technology and done work around the world. So, and I prefer Rehoboth. Thanks and welcome.
Thanks, Mike. Steve, you're still muted. There you go.
Oh.
Still muted, Steve.
Okay, there we go.
There, okay.
Hi, Jim. Nice to meet you. I envy your beard, your mustache. Could never grow one of those. My wife Sharon and I have owned a house here in Rehoboth since 1992, but we've been coming here for over 35 years. I'm a retired municipal and land use lawyer, serving in the Washington metropolitan area. This is my second year on the Planning Commission, and I'm looking forward to working with you.
Thank you, Steve. Mr. Bryan, I think it might be you. Still muted.
We all have a lot on our plate, and I'm sure we'll be glad to share the work. And we look forward to working with you. Like Steve Kaufman, I am a municipal and land use attorney with primary focus on representing lending institutions, financial institutions. I'm out in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, which is a historic neighborhood, as you might imagine as well. And I'm a new member to the commission, just having been appointed last fall. We have had our place here for 21 years and just really enjoyed this neighborhood. This is the place to be as far as we're concerned.
Thank you, Mike. I guess that leaves me. So I am completing my first 3-year term on the Planning Commission. I do wonder how I got here. I'm still working full-time. I'm a government employee. I'm a pharmacist by training. I work at the Food and Drug Administration. I am getting close to retirement, but I'm not there yet, partly because of the pandemic, because the support for workers, all over the world has changed for remote work. And the federal government is just a wonderful employer in being, totally supportive of work-life balance. So I'm probably not as close to retirement as I would have said I was a year ago, but we'll see how that works out. I've all my adult life I've been involved in community building, community development. I'm keenly interested in the commercial districts, Main Street, equity and justice in housing, fair land use, good government, you name it, the list goes on and on and on. But I found it a very educational experience, very rewarding, and very challenging at times to serve on the Planning Commission. But we have a wonderful group of people here. We really support each other and we learn from each other. And I think we're doing a fantastic job. So I'm happy to have the skills, background, and the dimension you bring to the committee. And I look forward to the challenges ahead. And I guess I'll have to say what Mr. Bryan said. It looks a little bit more like a fire hose than a garden hose. So I'm just preparing you. Thank you.
Thanks to all of you.
Okay, thanks again. So now, Mr. Weber, I think we should call the roll.
Of course, Mr. Bryan,
Present.
Mr. Covington,
Here.
Ellison,
Here.
Kaufman,
Here.
Ms. Matcha,
Here.
Mr. Strain,
Here.
Mr. Trunzo,
Here.
and myself here.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And Ms. Womack, verification of the meeting notice, please.
The agenda was posted in City Hall and on the city portal on May 5th, 2021. The agenda was amended and reposted in City Hall and on the city portal on May 11th and May 13th. Chairman, that's all I have.
Thank you, Ms. Womack. I'll note that the agenda was amended, not in order or content, but in terms of the communications and correspondence, which has been received and linked to the agenda by Ms. Womack. Thank you for that. So the next order of business is approval of the minutes. Again, Ms. Womack has been super busy. She's produced 3 sets of meeting minutes, and we thank you for that. They're very impressive indeed. So I'd like to draw your attention to a couple of issues as we proceed to this matter. One is that these minutes are very important to stakeholders in the Clear Space Rehoboth Spotlight matters. Ms. Womack reminds us that these are meeting minutes and not transcripts, so we're not looking for, word by word transcription of the meetings, although we really have amazing detail in there, and but we thank her for that. I have asked former members, Ms. Lucier and Mr. Patterson, I've offered them a review and comment period since they were members of the Planning Commission at that time. I have heard back from Ms. Lucier that she's very happy the minutes have been produced, and she'll defer to Mr. Patterson for any content corrections, but I don't have word from Mr. Patterson yet, but I'm sure he will cooperate. He works full-time also. So with those 3 points, I'd like to just ask everyone if, does anyone feel that they need more time to do a review of these meeting minutes, or are we ready to proceed with approval? Anybody can speak up about that.
Yes, I think we're ready to go forward.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Strange. Anyone else?
I think if we're talking about all the minutes that are outstanding, that I would think we need more time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Weber.
Yeah, I think too that the minutes are as important as you indicate they are. I think we should allow us more time.
Okay,
I agree.
I also do agree. So
okay, so I have looked through them, and I'm of course very happy with the accuracy, but there's a lot of information in them, and I would really benefit by having them sit for a day and take a look at them. So I had a brief conversation with Mr. Mendelis, and I would like to offer, I'd like to throw this out for people to discuss, but I would like to get these meeting minutes approved as soon as possible. And although I hate to do this, I would ask, would people be willing to notice and have a brief meeting sometime next week solely for that purpose? Do you think that's possible in everyone's schedule?
Yes.
Yeah, yes.
Yes.
I'm fine with that.
Okay, so everybody seems to like that. That's good. So my next question is to Ms. Womack or Mr. Mendelis. How much notice do we need to do that, if any?
So here's the issue.
Chairman, you need 7 days.
Well, let me give some options to the chairman. Ann is right. Normally we need 7 days notice. So the earliest you could do it is notice a meeting today and have a meeting on Friday. However, an option you have to you is that if you continue the meeting that you have today, this is not something that I don't recommend doing this frequently, but it is permissible. If you, rather than adjourn this meeting today, you announce at the end of the meeting that you were going to recess the meeting and reconvene it at some point next week, you can do that with less than 7 days for the limited purpose of taking up these minutes for approval.
Thank you for that advice. So I like that advice. Does anybody feel uncomfortable with it to adjourn and reconvene next week? Maybe
No.
mid next week for this purpose?
Sounds like a great solution to me.
I agree with that.
Okay, so super. So I guess we're done with that. And thanks everybody.
Well, Jeff, Mr. Chairman, it is required that you, if you're going to follow that course, you need to announce the date and time of the meeting during this meeting, so the public that's here to see it is aware of when you'll be reconvening. That's the only reason you don't have to give the regular 7 days notice, because presumably the public is here now. So does everybody want to consult their calendars now? And Ann, are you able to look at what's available perhaps? I mean, Jeff, Chairman, I don't expect this to take more than 15 minutes, right?
Exactly. So, Ann, I hate to put you on the spot again, but if you could throw out, if you could access the calendar and let us know when we could do that. I can make time in my schedule anytime for that.
I have May 17th available, May 18th, and May 20th.
Can folks be ready the 17th, Monday?
That's tax day. I'd rather not.
So the next choice was, did you say 18th, Tuesday?
Yes, Chair.
Okay, how about Tuesday, the 18th?
I have I'm on a board of trustees for our community college. I have a meeting that afternoon from 1 to 2. I could do it later in the day, or I could do it earlier in the day.
Ms. Womack, is there time earlier in the day?
There are no meetings on May 18th at all.
How about 10 a.m.?
That's fine.
That would work for me. Yeah.
Good. Okay, we got it. So Tuesday, May 18th at 10 a.m. we will reconvene and complete the meeting minutes.
Perfect.
Jeff, I had a question, if I could ask about this. Do all three of the special meetings or regular meetings, do all three of them touch on clear space? or not?
They all three do have clear space in them, yes.
Oh, okay, thank you. Right.
Okay, thanks, everybody. The next item, sorry, Ann, we're making you work really hard today, but the next item is correspondence. And you're still muted.
The correspondence has been embedded in the agenda.
Wonderful, and I'm sure everyone's seen that. Thank you for doing that. That was a big job. Okay, so we're ready for our old business. So the CDP. So this informational item today is to bring the PC and the public up to date about the progress of the CDP. Work has been going on behind the scenes since last fall. It's not really obvious to anyone beyond the Planning Commission what has been going on. And the purpose of today's meeting is to explain in detail, in greater detail, what has been going on, a lifting of the veil, so to speak. We are going to also update the Board of Commissioners in about a week with just about the same information. I know it's a frustration to most citizens, however, to wonder about the progress or lack of progress, and it's also frustrating to us. We have obtained an extension from the state, and we have produced a timeline to finish the CDP within this extension. So I'm going to ask everyone to please hold your questions until Ms. Pfeil completes her presentation, and then we'll take questions from the PC. And of course, we'll hear from residents' comments later in the meeting in the general section, not right now in this section. And I see the presentation on the screen. Ms. Pfeil, would you like to start?
Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you, yes.
Okay, so you see the screen that says the project update. Welcome, Mr. Ellison. It'll be great to have an architect on board as well as assistance in the historic preservation chapter. So I welcome you. We pull a lot of state and federal data for that. So I think it'll be a great asset to the CDP as well. So with that, my name is Debbie Pfeil with KCI. Everybody pretty much knows me. And frustration is on the consultant's end as well. So I want to let you know that we're in this together. We have been held up. We have completed a change of scope, a change of schedule. It's out of our control as well. So we have a game plan, and we'd like to basically divulge everything we've been working on completely today based on legal advice and state requirements. Going to, you see slide number 2?
Not yet. Here we go.
So just as a refresher, and I think it's great that we're going to have a new set of eyes on the project as well. The plan date was due July 2020, and we received an extension till January 23rd, 2021. As you know, we hit COVID around that time. And then we still are in compliance as we have our extension until July 23rd, 2021. So prior to that, we've met with the state agencies and the county, and I have kept them in the loop on some of the things we're working through. So what I'd like to let you know is we've had continual CDP communication with Office of State Planning. I want to say it's either monthly or at least quarterly at a minimum. And we were required to present to the State Cabinet Committee. For those that don't know who the State Cabinet Committee is, it's several of the Secretary Cabinets of the state of Delaware. Transportation, DENWEC, housing, there's several other, agriculture, there's several cabinet secretaries. We had to complete a presentation on April 21st. We do apologize that this did not come to you before that meeting. It was divulged to us that we needed to get our extension in before the expiration. We also get it in before Connie Holland's retirement, as she was the Director of Office of State Planning. She was very familiar with our project. And we wanted to get it in before we expired. So the city request was supported by Office of State Planning Coordination. That was a very nice endorsement to have going in, because we've been very honest on where we're at, where we're moving forward, and how we can get some help. So we received a final extension approved for until July 2022. So sitting here, if it was the public or if I was on the commission, I would almost say, why the heck do I need one for another year? A whole another year. We're going to get into some details as to why, and things have been moving all along. Nothing has really stopped, is what I want to reiterate. So you've heard before that we had a mapping situation where there was an analogy done, and this was an analogy between the county and the city records, and it was parcel data. So that should be pretty easy. In a layman's term, that's pretty easy. That's GIS data labeling information. But we found 133 discrepancies. I actually did this as a courtesy, and we found these in the fall, and we found 133 of them. Adjustment of a property line that's maybe a foot or 2 feet or 5 feet could be the scaling. So we were less worried about that specific information. We're going to show you some of these that we think could have hindered land use decisions and why we needed to readjust and do the mapping. This involved intense data research. And when I say intense data research, this is where just about every lawyer that we have on the phone will completely understand this. It is trying to go in to find surveys, legal descriptions, handwritten plats, and sometimes all of those documents don't even match each other or reference something that's not even on the project. And I'm sure land use lawyers have been through that, as well as developers. So we found some discrepancies over the several years, whether it's a recordation, a surveyor, or a stamping or approval, or just execution. So once again, we've had ongoing communication with Office of State Planning, and we requested, which I think is the first time I've heard this in my capacity, for mapping. We requested assistance from Sussex County Mapping. They have a phenomenal mapping department that's very willing to help and provide intergovernmental support. DENREC as well, and First Map, for those that might not know that tool, is a free mapping tool that has different layers and information is imported into it on different times, but it is a snapshot in time. I can tell you that we're looking at the most recent data for everything. So out of these 133 discrepancies have been sent to the county to research, and they've been researching those. And I have about every other week, by week or every 2 week conference call with the county to say, how are they doing? Staffed, they got additional people, and we actually asked them to help us do this researching. And these are areas where we felt that we found some records discrepancies that maybe the county could help adjust or do some further research and provide us documentation. There's 22 that we're still researching. We should have those handed over to the county or identified or resolved within the next 2 weeks, I would assume. And there's 24 that we categorize as beachfront properties. Now I'm going to go into a couple of these examples for you. There's 41 of those are lake properties. And then 19 on this list, we've already resolved or corrected. And by resolved or corrected, I do not want you to think that we're taking a marker or a pen like old school, but now in the GIS data that we're just moving lines. We're actually finding valid documents, if ever challenged or ever questioned, so all the people that have the different layers have the same information. So we are not, KCI, we are not massaging parcel layer data. We are pulling it from the state and county. The county hosts parcel information for all of the municipalities. So let's get into a couple examples so you will understand why this is really critical and important, and why the state wanted this to be addressed as well, as much as the city, the mayor, the planning commission chair, the attorney, the city manager, myself. So here's an example on my screen of beachfront examples. So when we did our analysis, as you're going to see, the pink is the county parcel data, and the gray line or black line that's gray shaded is the city parcel. So when we take information, and some of these have been resolved, some we've found some deeds information on, but when we take and write the land use chapter and the zoning chapter, we go by acreage and parcel data. So we say, how many acres do we have of this, meaning residential, commercial, etc. How many zoning categories do we have of this? So if we were to produce the maps that are in red, we feel it could produce controversy when the Planning Commission releases the document, and as well as you making decisions. So one of these is being carefully looked at and identified and addressed. If they need to be prolonged past our time frame, then we have to put a disclaimer into our plan. Some of these may take meetings with property owners. So our job is to get that 133 resolved down to as little as possible and move forward in the plan. So we wanted to basically share that's the beachfront examples. And there's more than this, but I just want to let you know that we wanted to give you a snapshot to understand what our analogy kind of looks like. And we definitely want to look at not producing incorrect information on anybody's part. The next example is Silver Lake. So Silver Lake has several, what you're going to see once again, the pink is going to be the county data, and the black with the gray shading is going to be the city data. So you'll see that some people have 2 parcels of land that's split by Lake Drive, and others have an extension of their property in the same parcel, but the lines do not match up. And this is, which affects acreage, et cetera. So we're finding that there's 2 parcels in some data sets and 1 in another, which makes a big difference in our land use calculations. So here is that the city actually was awarded a DNREC surface water matching grant for the management plan. So that the United States Army Corps of Engineers is developing the plan with Rehoboth, DNREC, and then we touch a little bit on Dewey in this project. So item number 3 on the bottom, that's actually the scope of the project. So they have to establish ownership and jurisdiction of the shoreline. It's going to affect sea level rise, shoreline, property management. So that data we can be able to deliver within the comprehensive plan if it's done in the same time frame. We will have to once again put a disclaimer in there. We are sharing information with the city to share it with the Army Corps of Engineers because we've already identified these. We definitely know these are in areas of need. And once again, these aren't all the lakes. We just wanted to give you a snapshot because we didn't really want to bring in each person's specific properties. Just give you an overview.
Debbie?
Next one is average discrepancy examples. So it's the same deal here. The city parcels are in the pink. The color from here, the first map parcels, which is going to be the counties, are in yellow. So if you look up here in the D3 area at the top, we have one data set has it as 1 parcel, another data set has it as 2. So it's not necessarily a who is right, who is wrong situation. It is a, did it get recorded? Who approved it? Was it approved? How did this end up being 1 and or 2 lots? So there's a lot of information that we're pulling through on these. And with COVID back in the fall and probably up to recently, the recorded information and the actual going into the offices and getting file cabinet information was very restrictive. It was very, so much a deterrent to this project, where now everybody's pulling electronic data and we will have files on these 100 some properties. So will the city and so will the county. So once again, when you're looking at a piece of property and you're determining wants to develop this, it would have 1 or 2 or 3 structures on it. It could be a problem. So then that's the high level on the top 3. There's odd discrepancies, but that's the high level on the top 3. So where we're at today is there's still 4 phases, which you've seen this slide before in our overall scope. There's still 4 phases. Our first phase is mapping and the plan updates. That's where we're at right now. And I can tell you the accountability by the Planning Commission chair and the mayor and the city manager has ensured, I've had to ensure them that I am in touch with the county every 2 weeks. So there's a continual update that takes place. So everybody knows that this is moving forward. We cannot not adhere to the state requirement anymore or the extension. So the next is the internal draft review and input. That's where you come into play. And then there's the external review and input, which we've talked about, which is releasing it to the public, the community, the neighboring properties, and then state certification and city adoption. So if I was looking at this, I'd say that's 4 easy steps. When are we going to get going? So let me break this down to you because I couldn't even shorten the year adoption in working with state planning and state laws and public notices. So this is where we're at right now, where we're researching, we're going to finish the zoning map and the future land use in July. and then review the outcomes, because somebody has to agree between the city, the state, and the county. Somebody has to agree on the information that was found. So we're looking at doing that in July. While that's taking place, we're still writing the chapters. There's some new data that came out, some new tables and charts that came out in April on some things. So we are updating those charts for the 4th time to try to get us 2020 and 2021 information rather than 2017 through 2019 information. So then in August is when we look at updating, at July and August, updating everything. So this is basically on us, the city staff, the county, and the state at this time. When you come into play is going to be the phase 2, which you've seen. The highlighted yellow is the internal rough draft complete plan in the end of August. We did change our scope, and you will be seeing the comprehensive plan as a whole document, not as chapters. Just the past 4 months, we went through a chapter review, and I can tell you that we rewrote some of the chapters that the planning committee or that the city staff has seen 4 times, because to get into housing, you sometimes go back into environmental. Sometimes you go back into historical, culture, and resources. So we have found that that's been multiple drafts that is budget and doubled our schedule. And I asked the reviewers of this particular municipality how they liked reviewing chopped up, and they said it's very hard to read the full book when you get 1 chapter this week, 2 chapters next week, 3rd chapter the next, and then get it again. So we'll be providing a complete plan the end of August. You will get the entire document with the mapping update information. After that, this is the same thing you've seen before, but for Mr. Ellison and others, I'll let you know the highlights in red are what actually gets released. After we get the Planning Commission's comments back, we're going to review them. We're putting them in a spreadsheet, as we talked about. We'll review them potentially at a special meeting if it's needed. And then we make all those changes so the Planning Commission feels as comfortable as they can with the document. Then we release it internally again to the Board of Commissioners, the city committees, to get their input, because they haven't been a part of the process other than the fact that we have done interviews with them, which has been a great contributing factor. But with COVID, we had to cancel our community organization, our events, and we haven't been able to have many inter-committee meetings. So we have their data, we've updated it. We've also gone to each one of their websites and pulled their recent data. Remember when we did our organizational interviews, it was a year ago. So we've had interns go through minutes of all the organizations to pull the most recent information. And they'll have a chance to be able to look at that because they share some of the same goals as some of you brought up before. I think it's released for the public. And we actually are looking at when we make the changes from the committees, that's going to get us through the holidays. That's November, December. That's a tough time. So we can make the changes. We can get it to the boards, the committees. So we can have everything done by the end of December. So then we go into the release of the document externally. So now we have a joint meeting with the Planning Commission and the Board of Commissioners, and we collectively release the document. Meaning internally, everybody has had to stay on the document. Our comments are good. We've addressed them, included them, met about them. And now we want to hear what the organizations, the public, the communities, the businesses, the state, and the neighboring municipalities have to say. And that's a longer process that takes about 90 days. So we're looking at releasing this document. And one thing I heard the entire time we've been doing this is we do not want to give the public or the organizations only 30 days to review this. We've put the 90-day window in there. So from the beginning of January until the actual public hearing, which is in May, we're going to ask for advanced comments in April so we can start working on those and start addressing those and getting those ready and laid out for you. So from the beginning of January through April is going to be advanced written comment requests for public hearing. And then the public hearing jointly will take place in May. So now we have our external in phase 2 or internal phase 2, external phase 3. We go into the adoption portion. So once again, we have draft number 4, which will then we have to make changes on based on what we heard from the planning public hearing, what you agree with on what we've heard from the public hearing and the external resources. And then we make those changes and we have to once again submit it to the state by law for them to review it. We have 20 working days. Once we get hopefully a clear certification issue, or clear certification letter, we can go ahead and release, do a joint comment review or adoption based on that, and then receive our state certification. So adoption, we put in there end of July, beginning, or end of June, beginning of July. So as you can tell, this is stretched out to allow the number of meetings that we've discussed. We added, I think, 2 in there with the mayor and planning commission chair's recommendation, additional ones, in case we have a lot of comments, but we do have to meet that end of July adoption date. So with that, we're still moving along, and our next update that we're producing for the planning commission is July 9th. We are scheduled to produce this same presentation to the Board of Commissioners on the 21st of May to address any concerns and what we're working through. And then I will turn that back over to the chairperson for questions.
Thank you, Debbie. We are very grateful that you have been able to stick with the project across these many years.
Thank you.
The learning has been a steep curve for everyone, including you. It's sometimes not fun to have a very unique situation, but you know, we've pulled together. I have to say that I've certainly got more involved in city meetings and county meetings and the state cabinet level meetings than I ever expected to, but very positive experiences. Folks are very thoughtful and concerned, and they are adamant that these maps have to be as correct as possible. So there's no wiggle room, as Debbie explained. So thank you for the presentation. I'm sure there's going to be questions, so why don't we just move on to that phase? And you can leave the presentation up. Someone might want to refer back to a slide if you don't.
Hi, Debbie. It's Rachel. I have a question for you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thanks.
Okay, back to the slide on Silver Lake. There was a point you had there around determining jurisdiction of who owns the shoreline, I think. Could you go back to that one?
Yes, that slide?
Yeah, establish ownership and jurisdiction. So is this indicating that we don't really know who has jurisdiction of the shoreline? I thought that had been determined.
There was, as far as I know the history, there was a study that was done by a historical group that's been referred to, but there wasn't legal documents attached. It was more assumption with a little bit of research. So what has happened is there's been a shoreline change based on the state owning the lake, from what I understand from information. So when you have water and waterways and shoreline and the riparian buffer, et cetera, it gets gray on what's an easement, what's a right of way, and what is ownership. So the lines, we were less worried if something was off, you know, maybe a foot or two, because that is going to get legally down to a survey. What we were more worried about is when we have a person that owns 2 pieces of land, 2 parcels of land recorded separately, and one data set shows they only owe 1. So if you ever wanted to do something structurally on 2 pieces of land, you might not be allowed because of the code being on 1 piece of property. And these are interesting because it also gives you rights on if you can build, how close you can build to the lake, which is sometimes out of the hand of the city. So I would say ownership wise, the tax bills are set. The ownership as far as who owns it, it just depends on, do they get 1 tax bill, 2 tax bills, 1 parcel, 2 parcels.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Yes.
This is Steve. I had a comment that I wanted to make. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, this is actually for Jeff. This is just an observation, Jeff. Given the timeline and for purposes of continuity, it should be noted that terms of members of the Planning Commission will be expiring during this time. Yourself, I don't know if Mike Strange's will terminate, but even Barry, myself, and Rachel, I don't know if we go to June or July of 2022, they will also be terminating. So it's something that the Board of Commissioners will have to address. They want to keep continuity of this group. They're going to have to keep that in mind. That's just something we need to be aware of.
Thank you, Steve.
And that's a great comment, if I can interject quickly. I have all new members. When I first started this project, I think Jeff and Lee, I think, are the only, I might get that wrong, original standing crew. And so it's probably, so I don't know the longevity of it, but Board of Commissioners changes too. So does environmental committees, so does other committees. So during a comprehensive plan project, committees do change in jurisdictions. It happens all over the place. However, if somebody is not reappointed or appointed, we still want them to be a part of the process. So there's still the review, they're still coming to the meetings. I think that history is great, but I also want to let people know that sometimes not being a part of the history and having a fresh set of eyes on things is good too. And you have a very diverse group, which I think will be great, but we will hit different board members all the way through Board of Commissioners, staff, to you name it, going through a project like this. We're used to that, but I hope everybody still stays involved.
Yeah, thank you, Debbie. And it's a great observation. And I'll add that Mr. Strange is also part of that.
Oh, yes.
Here at the beginning. And also, we have unexpected departures as well as expected.
Yes.
So change is universal. The system continues. It's bigger than any of us.
Yep.
Mike?
Yeah, Debbie, I have a question. I agree with everything that you said at a technical level with regard to the plans and the mapping and the importance of that, and the GIS, the impact of GIS has had over the long term. But I'm concerned that a significant component of the CDP is philosophical and is independent of the explicitness of the technical metes and bounds of the plans. And I'm concerned that we haven't seen essentially anything of that. And I want to know what your feeling is to, well, if you would permit that to start so we could see it, the bits and pieces, because quite frankly, the philosophy isn't going to change based on a particular meet and bound change.
I think that's a really good comment, and I'm glad you brought it up, and I'm glad you see the issue that we have with the mapping moving forward. So if I was to research data, like we talked about originally in January, we had 2017 and 18 data, and that's what you would have gotten, because that's when we stopped our writing and tried to update our tables. Well, now I can take it to 2019. Some of the 2021 information has come out. The state just released 3 different new studies in 2021 and 2020. So what happens is if I was to release that 17-18 information in January, I would be rewriting it in the final document. And the state would come back and say, and they've had it happen to me, because of the delay from writing to the time you actually release it, the state would come back and say, you need to rewrite this chapter and update with our demographics, our population, our information, or the latest study. And that has tinted or have readjust your writing components and your philosophy based on the data that's supported. So a really good one is, big argument going statewide, is the population projection for temporary residents. Everybody's arguing about it, everybody's fighting about it. Some people don't agree with it. So we have to put the county's table stat in there. We have to put the state's table set in there. And the state just redid their numbers. So I'm trying to get it as tight as possible. So I have people now updating the tables on when we know a document comes out, when we do it. But I was very on board with releasing chapters until I'm going through this painful process right now. And it's not painful for a consultant. Literally, I've gotten through 4 chapters and minor comments on 4 chapters for municipality. And as I get into 5, 6, 7, and 8, we're having to go 1 through 4 again. The goal from this one is going back to this one. So I understand that that's going to happen with comments, but to go back and forth multiple times with old data is the part that is really going to frustrate the reviewer. And for people that are used to reading comprehensive plans, you can put bits and pieces together, but it's almost like pulling chapter 3 out of the middle of a book and not knowing what happened with 1 and 2. So we talked to the city and we agreed with, on our rescoping and our rescheduling to release the document collectively. And then there would be a red line. There would be plenty of time for the planning commission to review it. We have, a couple meetings in there to be able to review it and discuss it as well. because everybody's going to have a different background. I anticipate a lot of comments. So it's probably more an experience that what we've gone through, and it's an evolving document. And I think if I were to release the 2017, we would have rewrote those chapters next May when the state said something. So yes, Lee?
Yeah, Debbie, how much time contingency is built into the schedule? It just concerns me a bit that we back right up to the deadline.
So you mean as far as outreach on like a chapter at a time, or?
I mean, if there's some unforeseen happens and we're delayed by 30 days or 60 days, can we absorb that?
What's going to happen on here, and it's probably going to have as a consultant too, is we're not going to have an option. If we get the draft document and all the comments and the planning commission wants to have 3 meetings, it will be week to week to week to week. So we are going to have to collectively as a body squeeze it in, because that second phase has to kick off in that time frame to make the 3rd phase and the 4th phase work. So I think instead of, we've rarely had special meetings with the planning commission on the CDP. I think you're going to see a little bit more of that, because your agendas items are getting heavy and we're not going to be able to do things in 10 minutes on the CDP. So I do think we're going to be seeing a more active, probably in the fall, with the planning commission, and then it'll probably be in the 1st quarter of the year for the board of commissioners and planning commission together. But I do.
Debbie?
Yes.
It's Barry. I'm sure this isn't going to happen, but I've got to ask the question anyway. What happens if we don't get it done by July 2022? What's the sanction?
Well, first of all, it was, thank goodness, this Office State Planning Director, before she retired 3 days later, she endorsed the project. Secretary Skuse loves to make me squirm. And I'm presenting, and I've done this in front of this body several times. So I had to give my word. I am staying as a consultant for KCI for Rehoboth. So, literally I was not going to be employed in Delaware come July. So I'm staying on board. I have a contract with KCI to fulfill. KCI has a contract with the city that's very explicit right now, and we have to stick to that. And the city, the mayor, the planning commission chair, the city manager, and I all agreed to the state that we would have it done. So if we do not meet it, like you said, hoping this doesn't happen, but if it's not met, if you have a comprehensive plan that's not certified, you can have state and federal money and funding stopped. And I can guarantee you there will be a push for us to get it done if that happens. So that is the initiative, I should say, or
Motivator.
Yeah, big motivator.
Yeah, Barry, that's
a motivator for all of us, because we want to get this done. I do, you do.
Yeah, it's more than a want, it's an imperative at this point in time. I mean, we've had a perfect storm of problems. We have a cooperative arrangement. To some of the earlier comments, even if my term does not get extended on the planning commission, I plan to stay highly involved with my knowledge base at this point as a member of the public, and help get it across the finish line. And I know that applies to everyone in City Hall, and I know it applies to all the elected officials at all. It's a shared responsibility, and we're just going to have to do it. And for better or for worse, extra meetings are probably going to be the method that's going to get it done. And the super effort of Debbie and her staff as well.
And staying on schedule is going to be, we're now releasing a formal schedule. That schedule that you have was approved by the state. So we can't, I can't say, well, we're going to push this till December, because if you rob Peter to pay Paul, we are going to pay for that. So those phases are very important to hit. I think I can't stress that enough. So when we say we have homework, we have homework. When we say I have to turn in the draft by August, I have turned the draft in by August.
So Debbie, just to follow up on that, if we, let's say that we don't have all the data, or we're pushed to that July date, we can still submit the report, and what'll happen, they'll come back and say we have to add to it, or do we then meet the requirement of getting in time, even though if it's not particularly complete?
So the adoption portion is the cliffhanger there because we're on an extension. It didn't used to be the initiative we used to take was submit it in, as long as it's into state planning, it's in their hands. We'll wait to hear their comments. Well, we're on our 9th live, as you might put it, and we're not going to be able to go past that point. And to be honest with you, as a consultant, I would never submit something to state agencies that would open up, that wouldn't meet their checklist to the best of our ability, or a lot of comments where we're going to have to rewrite, because what could happen there very easily is if we decide to hurry and write this and not take all this into consideration, not get a lot of comments, we then get a lot of comments back from the state, the county, the public. And if we rewrite a lot in this document, we will have to hold another public hearing and another process on the revamped draft if it changes drastically. So you really want to have the best tool that you can out to the public and the state at the same time.
Debbie, Barry's comment reminds me that we may have gone over implementation items too quickly. So starting with those 131 properties, of course,
Yes.
we would love to get down to 0.
Oh, yes.
In other words, we would like to have 133, excuse me, I misspoke. We would love to have 133 resolved corrected items by July. We know we're not going to get there, but the CDP can have an implementation item or two that's of a reasonable scope. So for instance,
Beachfront.
the lake properties, there's ongoing interagency effort to work on that and grant being worked on. So that can be an implementation item. It need not be done in the next few months. Am I speaking correctly, Debbie?
We got to where they threw the 90% range back to me. So what I basically alluded to them, and I'm going to go back to the slide that shows the breakdown. I feel comfortable that we can get, the first 49, the Sussex County, the city research, and we have the 19 resolved. The lake properties is an ongoing grant that's funded, and all the state agencies are involved in that. And when the state doesn't know, and the county doesn't know, and the city all collectively have to work together, we know that that's going to be survey research. So I do think we can punt some of those if they're not done. Beachfront, we are going to clean up what we can and know. Like, we know that there's grant funding for beach replenishment. We know that there's data that's been out there. It's just in the right person in DENREC and the city, et cetera, to follow. So we need to get this down as close to 133 if possible. And then we are allowed to punt some that would turn into long range identified projects. You're correct. And it will be a disclaimer in the mapping section about where we pull our resources from, where they sit, and then identify any discrepancies that we're aware of.
And I said that to emphasize that the milestones, the date when something happens, that's the date it's going to happen. So
yep.
the best decision that could be made on that date, and that we're going to move. We're not going to delay when we hit those milestones.
This is Jim Ellison. Would you characterize the schedule that you have set forth as already squeezed? Or is it possible to do some early in the schedule squeezing so that there is a little bit of flexibility left at the end?
So I put in what I thought is a little bit of relaxation in each phase, not a lot, just enough, because most municipal clients hold 2 meetings. They have us as a consultant take all of the comments. They trust us to go through all the comments and give a recommendation, and then they either accept, want further research, or don't agree. Rehoboth is a more active planning commission. It's the largest planning commission board in the state of Delaware, as far as a municipality, and they're very active, and we do not have city staff involvement as much, and then it'll get to Board of Commissioners. So we have several meetings built in here that are way in excess compared to the other 7 comprehensive plans that I've written in my career recently. So I do think we're sitting very well as far as additional meetings. What's going to have to happen is everybody will have to be realistic about when we have to jump, we have to jump. And I know that's why we released this. So if people aren't getting homework done, or if I'm not meeting my milestones, we have to make it up someplace else. And we took into consideration, Mr. Ellison, I think, which is really good. that November, December timeframe, I hate to say it, but no work gets done by anybody but consultants. It's just a downtime that we can't have meetings as well. People are traveling, people are shopping, people with their families. So that's the toughest time to get things through. We took advantage of that time frame to update that final plan before it goes to the public in January. So that November, December timeframe, we're still working. We have less holidays as a consultant. So I think that timeframe could elaborate for additional meetings if we need them. We have a special meeting. We have another meeting at the beginning of mid-December. So I think this is the best we could do, backing it into a year. It could be tighter, but the city really wants additional meetings. So I think it can be met, it has to be followed. And following it is part of the difficult task for this project.
Jeff, to Steve, along the lines of what Mr. Ellison said, I would suggest that when we get to July and we see where we are, and maybe just have the Silver Lake ones left, let's take a look at what we can consolidate, if there's anything we can consolidate. I agree with him that if we can consolidate more earlier rather than later, we won't be under quite as much pressure at the end. So I would hope that in July, when we have this information, or we're supposed to have it and see where we are, that we should look at whether we can consolidate some of this timeline.
I like that suggestion because, you know, we're fortunate that the meeting in July is early in the month too, and August is a long month. So that does, you know, if things go amazingly well, we will be able to do something.
Just for clarification, this schedule as written was adopted by the state in our approval. This is what was approved. So, you know, we coordinated this with state planner, we coordinated this with the mayor, we coordinated with the planning commission chair, with the lawyer, because we have legal public hearing issues we have to work through. So this is the schedule that's contracted right now by all. If we can
Debbie,
do something in the middle, that would be great.
Let me, these are sort of end dates for each of these points, right? So if we can do them sooner, then, for example, update draft plan number 3 before December, let's say we do it in November, would that violate the schedule? I mean, are we allowed to?
We aren't able to do this sooner. We're knee deep in your mapping right now. Like August is, you know, from my point of view, we are the city staff on this project right now, 100%. We're calling the county. We're working with the state. We're working with DNREC, not a city representative. So every 2 weeks, I'm meeting with the county. I'm going through the mapping that the city gave, and we're going through the county documents. So if somebody was to take that on outside of us, then I would say it could go faster. But in the backdrop of this, we're still writing and updating the tables and charts and chapters. So if we do things earlier, as far as your schedule wise, meaning you turn around your comments earlier, or we have a meeting that's scheduled earlier, I think that would be fine, but I do not anticipate the draft comp plan being done before the end of August, if that's a discussion point. But if we have 2 meetings in November and 1 in December, just remember there's tasks in between each one of these steps. When it says 2 meetings in December, right there, the Planning Commission and Board of Commissioners, it's not as easy as saying we have 2 meetings. It's a 7-day notice, a meeting packet, a presentation to prepare, a dry run to do. So there's tasks, so many little tasks underneath each one of these timelines that we grouped. If we can do things faster, we definitely will push it up. But right now, this is based on the tasks behind each one of these with staff and everybody else. This would be what I'd feel comfortable with in a scoped project, and why we presented it collectively.
Okay, any further comments from the Planning Commission? Debbie, thank you very much. We appreciate your time today and your preparation, and we appreciate you carrying the ball on multiple fronts in terms of getting us to the next step. And thank you for staying engaged with us.
Thank you, and I will see you at the July meeting.
Okay. Thanks.
Take care. Thank you very much. We'll keep you in the loop.
Okay. Bye, Debbie. All right. So we are now ready for new business. And This is a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners for a change of zone request for 330 Rehoboth Avenue. So I have some comments to read before we get started. So we welcome the momentum on redeveloping this location. Redevelopment of the commercial corridor is here, and the community is very concerned that commercial redevelopment is appropriate to the character of Rehoboth Beach. We thank Limitless Development and Mr. David Hutt for their work bringing forth these related matters over the past few years. I wanted to say something about the correspondence. There's a lot of it. So a lot of correspondence has been generated. And for the record, I just want to disclose that this is partially stimulated correspondence. As I and the various advice I got from members of the Planning Commission was that we wanted to be sure that we had as much information from the public that we could get at the first meeting and not fall into the trap of having a series of meetings where information kept trickling out as information developed. So I did contact some community leaders that I know that could spread the word, and you see some of their correspondence in the record. So the stimulated demand is not a reflection of my support or opposition. Rather, it's partly in my recognition that with the lack of a city planner at present time, we really depend on citizen comment to inform our consideration about this change of zone request. So the applicant has expressed some frustrations with our progress, and I want to apologize for not communicating better about the timeline. When this project first came in, I could not identify other models for a change in zone from R1 to C1. And I was very concerned about how we would do a comprehensive job with the information that we have in the current zone and our other resources and our knowledge base. So I was continuing to consult people. I was just not ready to hold this discussion for the April meeting. So I'm sorry about that. I should have done a better job communicating it. We are more ready now. And I believe that today's presentations, comments, and discussion will illuminate the unique issues at this very unique parcel, straddling two access points to the city's commercial district. So today's discussion is about the land and the parcels and how the properties interrelate with their neighbors. We may hear information from the applicant about their plans, but we are not considering the building today. We do welcome open disclosure of such plans, which are known. And I also want to bring the attention to everyone that large commercial redevelopment has been a topic of this Planning Commission and even before I joined. And certain changes to city zoning have occurred because of discussions we've had at planning commissions, or partly happened, such as the zoning amendment of March 19th, 2021 by the Board of Commissioners, which removed FAR from the calculation for underground parking. So in other words, we had a penalty before for underground parking, and now we do not. So that's a big change that has occurred that I want everyone to be aware of. Finally, I want to assure all parties that site plan review by the city and the PC will happen at a later date when the applicant is ready to proceed. At that time, I am assured that a city planner will be engaged to help manage and advise on the many issues which I believe are unique to the redevelopment of this property. Mr. Hutt, is there anything else you would like me to comment on, or are you ready to begin? And I guess we need to bring in Mr. Hutt.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't believe there's anything else that you've left unaddressed at this point.
Okay, thank you. Please proceed.
But thank you, Mr. Tronzo and members of the Planning Commission for agreeing to hear this matter this afternoon. For the record, my name is David Hutt. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Morris James, working principally out of the Georgetown, Delaware office. Here in the same room as me, and I think on the screen, I think you can see one of the principals of the developing entity, and that is Betty Gallows. Pointing to her, that's why there's a little distance between me and the camera. And the property is owned by 330 Hospitality Group LLC, which is comprised of two LLCs, the Limitless Development Construction Consulting 2 LLC and Change Street LLC. And Ms. Gallo and then Mr. Lockwood, who is off camera at the moment, are the principals of the entities which I just referenced. As this matter has had a somewhat extended history, I thought it might be helpful to start for the members of the Planning Commission, as well as the members of the public, with an explanation rather of how we arrived here this afternoon. In January of 2019, which due to the COVID pandemic seems like it was more like a decade ago than 2 years ago, but in January of 2019, the Planning Commission performed what the Commission calls a sketch plan review, or as you know it, a conceptual plan review for a hotel referred to as the Rehoboth Grand at the property 330 Rehoboth Avenue. One of the primary purposes of that sketch plan review, in addition to, of course, gaining some information from the Building and Licensing Office, as well as the thoughts of the Planning Commission that, of course, if the project comes to fruition, would be the ultimate site plan reviewer for the project, was to begin to unpack the issues that arise from any redevelopment that are caused by the split zoning of the property. Essentially, what was discussed that afternoon was that there's two primary routes for the redevelopment of this property. One of those would involve a series of variances and where an applicant would likely have to have conceptual reviews with the Planning Commission and then go through a variance process with the Board of Adjustment. And that could take several rounds. And I think that is a process that has occurred in the past on certain projects. And the second option, rather than going that route, would be a rezoning of the property so that it is all one zoning classification and does not have that split zoning characteristic. At near the conclusion of the discussion in January of 2019, the chairman at that time was Chairman Mellon, and he took what I'll refer to as a straw poll at that meeting. And the consensus at that time was that it would be better to seek rezoning rather than try to go through that process of a series of variances with going through the Board of Adjustment process. Of course, this matches good land use planning. And over the course of the next several months, a change of zone application was put together. And in June of 2019, a letter change of zone application was filed with the Mayor and Board of Commissioners. In July of 2019, the Mayor and Board of Commissioners referred the application to this Planning Commission for a recommendation on the change of zone application. On August 9th, 2019, the Planning Commission considered the change of zone application with the goal of making a recommendation on that application. At that time, Limitless Development Construction Consulting 2 LLC was the 99-year tenant of the property and was involved in an ongoing dispute with the owner of the property, Limitless's landlord, as it were, about the terms of the lease and other disputes. At that hearing, the landlord sent an attorney who objected to the city further considering the application and questioning whether or not the 99-year tenant had standing to bring a change of zone application. At that time, the Planning Commission brought a motion I believe Mr. Trunzo was there. I think he seconded the motion. If he didn't bring the motion, I think it may have been Mr. Perry who brought the motion and Mr. Trunzo who seconded it. But the recommendation that they made to the city commissioners, or the planning commission made ultimately to the city commissioners, was that the consideration of the change of zone application be delayed until the standing issue could be resolved. The standing issue has been resolved as 330 Hospitality Group LLC is now the owner of the property. And as I mentioned, Limitless is one of the interested members or owners of the ownership group that now has complete ownership of the property. And with the resolution of the lawsuit, a request was made by my office to remove the stay of this matter that was placed on it because of the standing question which had arisen, and asked that the Planning Commission make a recommendation on the merits of the application so that that could move forward to the Board of Commissioners, and the Board of Commissioners then could, of course, ultimately decide on this change of zone application. The question before the Planning Commission this afternoon in its simplest form is whether it's appropriate for the property to have just one zoning classification. With that background of how we got here and the issue that's in front of the Planning Commission this afternoon with regard to this recommendation, I did want to take a brief couple of minutes to describe the property. I know all of you, and frankly, we heard an introduction as Mr. Ellison was welcomed to the Planning Commission. And so from those introductions, everybody, including the public, certainly recognizes that all of you are very familiar and have a lot of time and personal history involved within the city. But the property is, of course, located at 330 Rehoboth Avenue, and it sits at the intersection of Rehoboth Avenue and State Road. And the comprehensive development plan identifies 2 entry streets on the street map for the city. And those 2 entry streets are, of course, Rehoboth Avenue and State Road. And this property fronts on both of these entry streets. Mr. Trunzo, when he was introducing the application, I think referred to these as the 2 access points for the city. And that is reflective of what is within the CDP. As you know, along the Rehoboth Avenue frontage, there is a building on the property. Along the State Road frontage, there is parking for the building on the property. Behind the property, behind the building on the property, rather, there is a condominium complex that is known as Scarborough Village. There is a building that sits, one of the condominium buildings in Scarborough Village sits almost immediately behind the current structure on the property, and that is Building 6 of the Scarborough Village condominium. Behind and beside the parking area along State Road are single-family lots that are part of Country Club Estates. If we continue around to the frontage along State Road, of course, if you look across State Road, there is the Barrister Building, another commercially zoned property. And as you travel out of the city, as it were, on State Road, there is a parcel directly across from this that is also owned by the Board of Commissioners. The property is currently used by Limitless for office space, but no doubt when most people think of this property, they do not think of its office use, but they immediately think of it as the location of the Seahorse restaurant that was operated by the Lehmans and was a landmark restaurant in the city of Rehoboth Beach for probably 30 or more years. In doing and conducting some historical research on the property, those people who were familiar with the property even before the Seahorse restaurant was there would recognize it as the location of the Horse and Buggy restaurant with the Gundry family. Of course, after the Horse and Buggy restaurant, it was the Seahorse restaurant for many, many decades, or several decades at least. And after the Seahorse closed its doors, it was DiNardo's for a time, and then it was Chili Billy's. And after that, it was the first time it was used for office space, and it was used by Ocean Atlantic Sotheby's as an office. Since then, as I mentioned a moment ago, it has been used by Limitless for office space, and that is the current use of the property. Due to the age and condition of the building, a redevelopment requires the demolition of the existing structure, and of course, then that would involve construction of new improvements. When the June 2019 change of zone letter application was filed with the mayor and Board of Commissioners, It showed the details of the property and the surrounding properties as well. Two of the attachments to that were a survey prepared by Foresight Services, which showed the precise legal boundaries of the property. And if you look at that survey carefully, you will see that there is a total of 42,494 square feet of area within this property. And I always like to think of things in broader and more general terms. That is just shy of an acre, and more precisely, 1,066 square feet shy of being a full acre of land. The other attachment to that change of zone application was an aerial image that you're all familiar with through your CDP process and other applications that you've seen. And overlaid over top of that aerial imagery is the town, or city's rather, zoning map showing the zoning line which runs through the property. When you look at that, you can see that, and I'll be very precise for a moment, but then from this point forward, I will round the numbers so that the saying of these numbers doesn't take longer than it needs to. But very precisely, 23,067.07 square feet is commercially zoned, or C1, and 19,425.67 square feet is presently residentially zoned, or the R1 district within the city. For purposes of the rest of the discussion, I'll refer to those numbers as being simply 23,000 or 19,500, but the precise number is, of course, shown on that meets and bounds survey. As you know, and as I mentioned a moment ago, the structures are located on the Rehoboth Avenue frontage of this property, and then the parking is, of course, on the State Road side. In speaking with several longtime Rehoboth Beach residents who I thought were some good local historians for this, I asked about the configuration of the property and the structures and parking. And to a person, everyone remembered that to always be the historical arrangement of the property. And in fact, the first time that we were at the Planning Commission for the conceptual or sketch plan review of the property, one of the planning commissioners commented at that time that based upon his personal knowledge of the property, he had 47 years of history indicating that that had been the configuration throughout those 47 years. The significance of this is, of course, that all of these uses, beginning with a horse and buggy, carrying through the seahorse, and then all the way to the current uses, are all certainly things that are permitted within the C1 portion of the property along Rehoboth Avenue. But they are all non-conforming with respect to the parking of a commercial business on a residential property. Likely due to the length of time that this non-conformity in current building configuration has existed, the non-conformity simply existed, and I'm sure very little thought was put to it. Of course, whenever somebody goes to redevelop a property, all of those things that have not been had a great deal of thought given to them or a great deal of attention given to them come to the forefront. And that is what has happened here, is the split zoning of the property is being highlighted by the proposed redevelopment of the site. As the Planning Commission is likely aware, and I recognize there are several land use attorneys and other individuals, architects and other professionals on this Planning Commission with experience in these matters. But the split zoning of properties is generally referred to as being disfavored, both as a land use concept and as a legal concept. And of course, that disfavoring makes sense not only as a general concept for unity's sake and ease of application of restrictions and codes and guidelines, but beyond the general sense, it certainly makes sense. And this property is a good example of why that concept makes sense. As Mr. Trunzo indicated when he introduced the application, what's in front of the Planning Commission this afternoon is not a site plan, which is why we did not submit a site plan type conceptual review with this change of zone application. But for those of you who are on the Planning Commission or look back at the materials or minutes from that meeting, you would know that during that meeting, there was discussion about issues that arise from a split zoning of the property. And those issues would arise whether it's the Rehoboth Grand that was proposed there or any other redevelopment of the property. In fact, Mr. Molina, who was the building official at that time, submitted a letter with a summary of his findings regarding some of the issues regarding variances and some of the difficulties that arise from a split zoning. 4 of those that I just wanted to highlight quickly, and frankly, I could probably put them all into one. But first of all, there are the permitted uses for these 2 zoning classifications are of course widely divergent and different from each other. As you know, there are permitted uses for each zoning classification that the city has, and those are certainly different in the R1 and C1 zoning districts. The second is the calculation of floor area ratio, or FAR, that occurs differently in these districts. As was just indicated a moment ago by Mr. Trunzo, there's been adjustments actually since this application was filed to some of that for the commercial district. Another, of course, is the calculation of area coverage or lot area coverage. Those differ between these zoning codes. And this is why the last one I'll say is that each of these zoning classifications has its own set of height, bulk, and area requirements that apply to it. And there is, of course, nothing in the code, and codes aren't designed or set up to address what you do when you have a split zone property in that fashion. Codes then anticipate that there's going to be a section of your property that's zoned in one fashion with one set of bulk area requirements, and then another with a different set of those requirements, and how a person is supposed to put those things together. And of course, the result of that is that there's a great deal of strain put not only on the property owner as they attempt to interpret that and come up with the best synthesizing of those various districts, but the building official staff, the building and licensing department, has those same issues arise, as it has to make sometimes novel decisions about how those things interrelate and how you take 23,000 square feet of commercial and 19,500 square feet of residential area and synthesize all of the bulk area height requirements and make sure that it complies with the city's zoning code and various other requirements. And significantly, and this goes back to a comment that I made earlier, this can lead to a process where an applicant ends up going back and forth between this body, the Planning Commission, on site plan reviews, and then the Board of Adjustment for variances. And while that could certainly occur under, even if the property had a singular zoning classification, it is certainly more likely to occur. And we have a report about some of the variances that were needed already if the proposed concept that was reviewed went forward regarding the variances that would be needed. As I mentioned at the initial meeting that we had on this, it was discussed that there's essentially 2 paths, a rezoning path and then the variance path. And this can all be boiled down to basically, I think there's two questions or issues here. And that is, first of all, that any redevelopment of this property, whether it's the concept that was reviewed in January of 2019 or any other concept, it's going to run headlong into this issue as soon as that redevelopment process begins. It is not the proposed hotel that was conceptually reviewed that's creating this issue. It's the split zoning of the property that brings about this issue. The second issue is that without a change of zone, there is likely going to be many variances that will be sought and a great deal of consternation and probably legal analysis in addition to the building analysis about the impact of split zoning on these various districts. As I noted a few minutes ago, in general land use parlance and principles, split zoning is disfavored. And the goal of any redevelopment, whether in any municipality or the county, should be, of course, to minimize or not have variances. The comprehensive development plan talks about the success of the renewal of Rehoboth Avenue. And I certainly recognize that the comprehensive development plan is by CDP standards is starting to get some age on it, which is of course why the city is in the process of reviewing that. But even in Mr. Trunzo's opening comments, he noted that the city welcomes the redevelopment of areas within the commercial corridor. And that's certainly consistent with what the vision was almost a decade or a little more than a decade ago, I suppose now, when that CDP was adopted. And certainly I'm not here to make an argument that this property was expressly anticipated as being part of that redevelopment. There are maps within the CDP that outlines areas of redevelopment, and those are certainly the first several blocks off of the ocean. But as the new CDP is being developed, certainly what will have to be recognized in that is that the city's success with redeveloping the ocean side of Rehoboth Avenue has had a positive impact on the redevelopment of and renewal of Rehoboth Avenue as you move west on Rehoboth Avenue. For example, and some of these, certainly if you go back in time a little bit, you have the Cultured Pearl, which is outside of the first couple blocks, right on the outside of that, and across the street from this location. Moving closer to this property, the Dogfish Head site was redeveloped by the owners and has been very successful in doing so. When you move further west on Rehoboth Avenue, there are a number of active and popular businesses such as Egg. And of course, the city presently has been working on expanding the pedestrian access and bicycle access just on the other side of the circle, of course, as you leave the city of Rehoboth Beach. In the executive summary section of the existing comprehensive development plan, one of the priority actions is to encourage and assist interested property owners in the creative redevelopment of properties on Rehoboth Avenue and its connecting streets. That is what the owners of the property certainly seek to do with this, is to redevelop this site, which sits at the access points or entry points on both of the access or entry points into the city. The request this afternoon is that the commission would send a recommendation to the city commissioners that they approve the change of zone request for the approximately 19,500 square feet of land from R1 to C1, so that this parcel could have one unified or homogeneous zoning classification. That concludes my presentation, Mr. Trunzo. Certainly myself, Ms. Gallo, and Mr. Lockwood are available for any questions that you or other members of the Planning Commission may have.
Thank you, Mr. Hutt. We appreciate the deep history, background, and everything you've explained to us and presented so well. And I assume that the folks you're representing don't want to add anything at this point?
No. They both told me no. I don't know if you could hear that, but they both said no.
Just wanted to make sure. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to the Planning Commission for questions, comments, whatever we have, in whatever order. I see Mr. Covington's hand first.
Yeah, a question for Mr. Hutt. Can you give us a history of how this parcel happened to be zoned commercial and residential? Was it always one parcel together, or was it at some point in time two parcels that were joined together as one? Why was one residential and the other commercial?
Mr. Covington, I wish I knew the exact answer to your question, but I do not. We have done a considerable amount of research trying to figure out that answer. My best estimate on why that occurred is, and I guess the one thing I can answer is that it is historically not been all one parcel throughout the entire history of the city of Rehoboth Beach. In fact, the portions closest to Rehoboth Avenue are part of the Rehoboth Beach Camp Meeting Association. And then the sections along State Road are not part of the Rehoboth Beach Camp Meeting Association. And that is my best theory as to what caused the split zoning, is that they sort of arose in different contexts and different in different time periods. And then, of course, as often happens, if something's being used in a particular fashion, with the restaurant being where it was located and the parking being where it was located, that continues on down through time. The initial plots, when you look at it for the Rehoboth Beach Camp Meeting Association, show one row of lots along Rehoboth Avenue. In fact, that plot doesn't even show State Road connecting to Rehoboth Avenue. If you look where State Road is now, that plot would show there being lots across where State Road is now, but just one row of lots. And so the front part of this property is, of course, part of that Rehoboth Beach Camp Meeting plot. And then the balance of the plot the balance of the parcel was not part of that. And that is the best explanation that I have at the moment as to historically why they were treated somehow differently in the zoning code when that was adopted.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Bryan.
Mr. Hutt, although the parking lot that is zoned R1 is a grandfathered use, how I would term it, do you agree with that?
Yes, it's certainly not permitted under the current code. So I think that would mean that its use is a grandfathered use, yes.
But having that status does not mean that for example, the setbacks that apply to this parcel are what is described in the residential zoning, correct? Not the commercial zoning, although it's being used as if it is commercial. Is that correct?
I think if you were to try to redevelop it, I think that would be the stance or the position that the building official would take. And I think that was what I was explaining or trying to explain earlier, would be the difficulty is you would have different setbacks. I think you're correct that in the R1 area, you would have a different setback as part of the redevelopment than you would in the C1 portion of the property.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bryan. Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Mr. Hutt. I'm very familiar with the issues and the difficulties that you raised concerning split zoning. And I think you're correct that split zoning is a difficult issue. But you're asking us to give you a recommendation of rezoning for the C1 zone. My issue really is that zone permits a number of uses. And my question to you is, pursuant to the code section 236.31, are you willing, or is the applicant willing, to provide us with a project concept prior to our making a decision? I know you did that originally, but you haven't done it here. And I think it's important for us and the community to know what your intended concept is and how you will provide sufficient protection to the surrounding uses in terms of adverse uses. So I can't speak for the others, but I'm not willing today to make a decision on this without more information concerning its ultimate use. So I'd like you to respond to that.
Thank you, Mr. Kaufman. I guess in the holistic sense, there is a concept that, as you mentioned, there's already been one that's reviewed, and the applicant hasn't changed that concept. The applicant views this still as one ongoing process through the city's planning and zoning statutes and codes. And so the concept that was presented in the sketch plan review in January of 2019 is the proposed concept for this project that the applicants intend to move forward with, assuming that the change of zone was successful, and then the site plan and the items that Mr. Molina noted in his report could be addressed. with respect to that, you asked about protection for adjacent property owners, and certainly that's a vital part of any zoning process. The largest protection, I think, in that concept that existed was that the footprint of the site would look very similar to what or the layout of the site looks very similar to what it does today and what it has for the known history of this property, with the building being located along Rehoboth Avenue and the parking being situated largely where it is today. And so the protection is that the use and buildings and structures continue in the same fashion as they have been, and the folks who live nearby have grown accustomed to over the years.
So I noticed that I believe this is a continuation of the original application. Is that correct, Jeff?
Can you ask the question again?
Is this a continuation of the original application? Or is this a new application?
This is new.
All right, so back to Mr. Hutt. The concept plan that you submitted was part of the original application. You haven't submitted it with this, and you haven't given any alternative concepts that utilize the entire property as a C1 property, not just for parking, but could possibly lower the height and also provide more, more buffer to the surrounding communities. I understand what you're asking for, and I'm not unsympathetic to it, but I feel that we as a planning commission need more information, and I think you have a perfect ability to do so under this section 236-31, provided, and I understand there is a 28-day requirement. If we were willing to waive that and let you bring it to us so that we could look at it again at the next planning commission, I would feel a lot more comfortable than making a recommendation today.
I wonder if I could make a comment here about Mr. Kaufman's concern, because you see in the correspondence, there's a lot of different recommendations about how to handle this. Of course, some of us have seen the history of this, some of us have seen all of it, some of us have seen part of it. I just want to ask a clarification first is, you just said that the site plan that we looked at was produced, I believe you said, assuming that the property would be unified under the commercial zoning. But I thought, and this could be just my own internal mind spinning around, that concept plan, I thought was presented as a fit for the current split zoning, and various variances would be necessary. Mr. Molina said that, other people said that, and it was meant to, should the property not be unified under C1, that this is a plan that maybe could be built with the right kind of variances. But maybe you didn't speak to that exactly the way you meant to, or maybe I have too many assumptions going on. Does my comment make any sense for you to clarify?
I think it does, and I'll certainly make an effort to hopefully better explain what I think I inarticulately explained last time. I think I agree with what you said, that when Mr. Molina reviewed it, he went over the number of variances that would be needed, assuming the redevelopment of the property occurred with the split zoning. As the members of the commission who were there, or if they've gone back and looked at the plan or the concept that was submitted, recognize the building. There's a portion of the building that does extend, a small portion of it extends into the R1 portion of the property. And so I think what I said during my initial presentation, or I hope I said, was that one of the reasons for that conceptual plan or sketch plan review was to unpack that issue of the number of variances that would be needed versus if it was one unified zoning district, then the number of variances hopefully is zero. Hopefully then it is a site plan review by the Planning Commission for approval of the project. And so if I didn't explain that well, I do think that certainly Mr. Molina's report in particular demonstrated the variances that would be needed if the redevelopment of the site occurred with the split zoning staying in place.
Thank you. And then if I could follow on to the other part, I think everybody has this impulse reaction. I certainly do. Mr. Kaufman, I think, explained it very well. Recommending a property move from R1 to C1, I can't find any record that that's ever been done in at least 40 or 50 years. So there's a heightened sensitivity around that's not true.
Why are we getting?
So
Somebody's phone's ringing.
maybe Max can figure out how to-
Yeah, it looks like it's the moderator.
Oh, okay, I'll talk about it. So
I'll try to text him, Jeff, while you're talking.
So there is that sensitivity. Of course, the historic use of the property has been commercial office. So, you know, we recognize that. The redevelopment, of course, you know, there has to be a regulatory path for redevelopment. And there are two options. Mr. Molina explained them. You articulated them very well. But it's difficult. The difficulty arises in because, of course, if the property is rezoned C1, then anything that's allowed in C1 can be built. Even though we have a lot of residential around this, including something that I'm very sensitized to, multi-family housing, which in my opinion is an issue of justice and equity within the city. I would not want to see one group of residents protected, helped or hindered more than another group. So it's very comprehensive. So that's a long rambling way of saying, I would really like to hear some assurance that you'll come back for a sketch plan review rather than a site approval application, should we make that recommendation. I would be very nervous to see a fully fleshed out proposal. We have C1 and we're ready to build this. It gives me a lot of heartburn.
Let me go ahead. Go ahead, Michael. You go ahead.
Well, if you want to respond to that, Steve, go ahead, because my comment is going to be rather long.
Okay. So, Mr. Hutt, and your application, I'm not unsympathetic to what you're asking for. I am somewhat sympathetic. My issue, and I'd like to hear from the other members of the Planning Commission, is there are very many uses in this zone. A project concept review is not a full site plan review. And so my question is, either I'd be looking for a proffer from you on it, or more importantly, I'd like to see a project concept plan, which, you know, it's just a concept. It's not your final project plan, prior to our making a recommendation. Now, I do see in the zone, in the code, it says you have to have at least 28 days prior to that. If we, as a planning commission, were willing to waive that so we could look at it at our next meeting, which is approximately a month from now, I think that would not delay you unduly. And I think it would give everyone a lot more comfort in moving forward. But I would like to hear from other members of the Planning Commission before we do anything else.
Mr. Weber?
Yeah, I would like to say that I agree with Steve. I mean, I'm really struggling with thinking about a recommendation for a zone change without knowing specifically what's planned for it, and somehow, and I don't know whether it's legally possible, but somehow linking the two. I know, from reading the citizens' correspondence, there's a lot of opposition to the rezoning, and I think it would be disingenuous to the citizens to rezone it without some kind of ironclad assurance as to what's going to happen there. Because as you mentioned, Jeff, it's not zoning it from C1 to C3 or vice versa. It's from R1 to C1, which, would allow the parking to exist there, but also allows another back of the envelope math of 27,000 feet of floor area to be built on the site as a result of the portion of the parcel going from R1 to C1. So there will be a lot of issues in the site plan review. And I just can't see how it makes sense to zone it or make a recommendation to zone it without on what's going to be built there.
Thanks, Lee. And I overlooked Mr. Strange earlier. We were supposed to go to him next, if you would. Please.
Thank you, Jeff. Actually, I'm going to end up disagreeing with everybody. One is that there's two things. The characterization of this property as being split zoned. I have personal knowledge going back 43 years that has been used this way. It turns out it was used inappropriately to have parking in the R1 area, but no one objected to it. And if you recall what the town looked like 43 years ago, it was very, very different than it is today. It was a small town that happened to be located next to the ocean. So you really have two separate zones by design, R1 and C1. And the C1 activities tended to ooze over into the R1 and it became parking. And it was very low intensity use, and that's very crucial. The second thing is I disagree completely with my counterparts that we need to know what goes on if this is to be combined zoning and converted into a C1. Because once something is C anything, what could be created, we'll never see it as long as it complies with the code. And so it may never come to the Planning Commission. That's the first thing. The second thing is, since this is separate zoning, it really isn't split zoning. It's just historically been used to where it's combined. So we have an R1 area and a C1 area. There is absolutely nothing that prevents the current owners of the property from fully developing the C1 property within the limits of the code in any way that they see fit. As long as it meets the code, we'll never see it. So it really is two different issues. And I think the one that disturbs me the most is that the current owners of the property knew this was the case 2 years ago when this was brought to us the first time, when David Mellon was chair, and then a year or so later, when Rick Perry was chair. In both cases, the Planning Commission indicated they did not make a recommendation, nor did they take a stand. They just talked about the possibilities of what could be done. It could go to, for example, if they wanted, they could go and have a series of variances by going to the Board of Adjustment that may or may not be supported by the Planning Commission. Or they could restructure their submittal where it made more sense for the Planning Commission. We are here today with, for whatever reasons it is what it is, and I'm sure that the COVID situation for the last year and a half has had an impact. However, with the current structure, this property, if we are going to make a decision, should be made on the merits, irrespective of who a particular applicant may be, as to whether it should be C1 or R1, or it needs to change for redevelopment purposes. Because once it gets converted to C1, a person, as long as they decide to develop in a way that meets the code, we will never see it. So from my perspective, I think we have to look at this from the standpoint of what our charter is. Under Title 22 of the state code and under our code, we have to consider the present and future needs in the judgment of the municipality that best promotes the health, safety, prosperity, and general welfare of the residents. Now, in doing that, we actually have to do things that make incommensurable things commensurable. Like, it's very difficult to do that, but yet we're charged with doing it. And in this particular case, it really boils down to intensity of use. The last 43 years, these two separate zones, the one zone, which is currently R1, has had an exceedingly low intensity of use. What's being proposed currently, although they could do whatever they wanted, if in fact we approve this, that then dramatically increases and changes the intensity of use going forward, or the potential use going forward. So I guess what I'm saying is, one, I don't think it's appropriate, even if we did or could know what the potential use could be, because if it was converted to C1, the individuals, whether it's this or another owner, never has to come back. The other aspect is, and I think it's moral hazard, and it's very important in this case, the current owners of the property knew it had two different zoning classifications. They can take the current part of the property, which is zone C1, and develop whatever they would like within the context of the C1 rules, and we'll never see it, and that's fine. That's what the building code is supposed to address. So I disagree with the characterization of it being considered and continuing to be called split zoning. What it is two separate zones by design that accidentally got used over time in a manner that wasn't prescribed by the C1 usage. I'll stop now. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. We got some hands going up. I think Mike Bryan was just a moment before Lee.
Mr. Hutt, have you, I don't think you've had an opportunity to answer Steve Kaufman's question or Lee Weber's question. Can you tell us at this point, before we go farther into this, what it is the applicant's willing to do or not about a sketch plan, your intended uses, restrictions on development, whatnot? Can you give us some insight as to what the applicant's view is?
Certainly, I'm happy to do that. The good news is, under what Mr. Kaufman proposed, and I think Mr. Weber joined in, is I think the city has in its files the concept that would be going along with this. The one confusing thing to me was, I think when it was a question was asked, I think between Mr. Kaufman and Mr. Trunzo about whether or not this was a new application. I don't believe that this has all been part of the same process. I know there was time involved because of a lawsuit and then COVID, but this has all been, from the applicant's standpoint at least, viewed as one continued same process for the same concept. And so there might be a little cognitive dissonance, I guess, between the applicant and the city on that issue, because it has been viewed as one proceeding by the applicant. And so if the planning commission were to want to see a concept, we could bring new copies of what was looked at in January of 2019. That is still the concept. And that is, I think, in answer to the questions earlier, that is the applicant's proffer on what would be going on the property, what the intended use is of the property.
So you would be willing to make that concept plan, be it a 2019 version, but perhaps updated today, you would be willing to make that a part of the record in this proceeding?
That is the applicant's intention, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I want to say something. Can I say something?
It's fine with me, yes, please.
Let me see if I can get the camera.
I would like to say that I've been in business and lived here probably 45 years. Came here as a kid in the early 50s. And I'm not going to put something on that property. I'm not going to put it, if the concept was for a hotel, the concept would stay as a hotel as far as I'm concerned. We're not going to put something there that's not conducive to what goes on in Rehoboth. And with the hotel there, the parking is going to be parking just as it was before. There's nothing different.
Would it be surface parking or underground parking?
Well, we probably have to do both, but there was some service parking,
Surface.
it's
surface parking with the way it was presented back 2 years ago.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay,
We want to do the same thing. We're only doing this because they asked us to do this.
And I'm sure we were asked to
Try to get a rezone.
it rezoned.
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Gallo. Anything else, Ms. Gallo?
No, that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did I say, I see Mr. Weber's hands, and I think Mr. Covington, and then Ms. Macho.
I had a couple follow-up comments and a question for Glenn. In my reading of the code, I would have to disagree with Mike that the Planning Commission would never see a plan for what's developed on there, because some of the prerequisites of site plan review, one of them is any property that's the subject of a rezoning. And so given that this property would be rezoned, it would have to come back to the Planning Commission for site plan review. And I think one could also make a strong case that building the hotel over the small office building that there would be a significant increase in the intensity of use and would also subject it to the site plan approval. I think, even if the commercial piece was developed independent of the residential, I would think it would be enough of an increase in intensity of use that would have to come to the Planning Commission for review. So I don't think there's a scenario, and Glenn, correct me if I'm wrong, where if it were rezoned, that the applicant could do anything they wanted with it without it coming back for site plan review. And also, following that train of thought, nothing would ever be rezoned, because if you couldn't, I mean, you would never have the rationale to rezone anything if you didn't have control over what was happening on it after the fact. I think nobody would get a zoning approval. So I think that's why the site plan approval was written that way, so that this could happen. That all said, I'm still not necessarily comfortable with zoning it to commercial without a specific commitment on what's done on there. I mean, I'm familiar with the site. I haven't gone by it. I'm afraid to even walk my dog. Appropriate. But I don't get the sense that the R1 portion of it is an appropriate R1 zoning for that. But, you know, it's at the corner of a very busy, two busy streets. I don't think it makes sense to leave it as R1. But I think that we need to be very careful about what is developed on there if it goes to commercial. And I just don't know, you know, one could say, well, go ahead and zone it. You still have the hook of site plan review, but I just don't feel comfortable with that.
They rezone it with conditions. No.
So I'm hearing some sidebar conversation, and there are words about rezoning with conditions. I don't think that's possible, but we're going to get into that later. So if you'll just hold that thought, that would be great. I think Mr. Covington wanted. Oh, I'm sorry. Glenn, did you want to respond?
I will happily respond, just that since Mr. Weber did ask a question. I think that as to the 2 points he raised, the first one, I would agree that prior to 2009, the city did not have a site plan review process. In 2009, site plan review was implemented, and I just pulled up the code. 236-30 addresses instances where redevelopments and projects would come before the Planning Commission. One of them, as Mr. Weber mentions, is a development requiring a change in zoning. Another is the development or redevelopment of a parcel of land or adjacent parcel of land in excess of 20,000 square feet, which might be another reason it would go. But the last one, of course, is anything the building official refers to the Planning Commission because they just feel it's something that needs some additional oversight. So I think that a redevelopment of this area, these parcels, would come before the Planning Commission. On the second point raised by Mr. Weber as to having a site plan ahead of time and somehow linking the zoning to the site plan, when we have tight spaces like we have, is of course we'd like to know exactly what's going on the property before we make a zoning decision. But a planning commission really is supposed to look at an application like this and look at the zone that's been requested and ask certain questions along the lines of all these uses that could be done in this zoning district. Would those uses be appropriate for this area? Are all of these uses generally in the same, do they satisfy the character of the neighborhood? And, that's really the basis for a zoning decision, because even if you link the zoning to some particular site plan, an act of God, fire, something else happens, and this use is removed in the first 5 years, well, you're back at it with a clean slate, and any of those uses could go back on that property. So it's a really difficult task I think you have before you, because of course you want to know what's going to be there if you're going to pursue a rezoning of it. But I just caution you a little bit that the zoning shouldn't be linked entirely to the project concept. I understand the desire to see what might go there, and I think that's the right instinct to have. I just caution you that the zoning shouldn't be entirely conditioned upon a site plan.
Rachel, you wanted to say something.
Oh, yeah. We had both Barry and Rachel waiting.
Go ahead, Barry. I'll wait.
Well, Lee stole my thunder about the first point. I was going to bring that up exactly the way he presented it. But my question, follow up to Glenn, is can a covenant of some sort be entered into with the landowners, which says that the property can't be redeveloped for other than a hotel?
So there's some split case law on sort of conditionally zoning something. I think it's a bad idea. So there are instances though where an applicant will offer to make some sort of an accommodation that would satisfy a planning commission's concern. So for example, I've seen before instances where an applicant will offer to deed restrict the property. So they would deed restrict the property so that a portion of it can only be used one way, or it won't be used for 2 or 3 uses that might be currently allowed in a certain zoning district. So there are certain ways that could occur, but you as a planning commission, I wouldn't recommend that you put a condition on the zone. I would much rather that the applicant take some measure to restrict the property.
So Glenn, you're really recommending that we make the decision on the rezoning just at face value, not connect it to the potential project or the project that 2 years ago was recommended as part of this application?
I think it's really difficult not to consider the zoning in the context of the use proposal. So, in a perfect world, you would make the decision in a vacuum, because and then anything that's allowable in that zoning district, you'd be comfortable going on that parcel. Here, I think our zoning districts, we have a limited number of zoning districts, so there's a kind of a wide, broad spectrum of uses that can go on them. So it's difficult to find. I think it's difficult to find any parcel in the city that you would say C1 will be good here with any of the uses allowed in that district. So it's a natural instinct to want to know what's going to go there. I just caution you not to link the zoning decision entirely to the site plan that's presented.
Okay. I was just going to comment as well. I liked the way that Steve and Lee were positioning the sketch review with obviously the consideration of the rezoning. I do think that obviously this would come back to us. I was thinking about the code as well that Glenn has already stated. So in my mind, it does give us more opportunity to look at this and obviously ask more questions around it. So That is really kind of my thinking, is let's look at the sketch plan as part of this application and come back and consider this.
Thank you, Ms. Macha. We have some other hands up. Looks like Mr. Kaufman and Mr. Strange.
Yeah, I'll be brief here. First of all, I appreciate the applicant's stated intention on the record. That's very helpful. And I also appreciate Mr. Hutt's making the sketch plan that has been presented before part of the record of this proceeding. And I do agree with Glenn. You can't base it solely or totally on a project concept, but I would like to see a concept that utilizes the whole property, not just the current commercial piece and the other piece just totally parking, because there's opportunity to have better utilization of the whole site and also provide more buffer and protections to the surrounding community. I realize you might not want to do that, but that's why I had suggested that we see a concept and that we deferred the decision till next meeting so that we can look at a concept other than the one that has parking as part of it and a hotel as part of it, and looks at it as a whole property. I don't know what others think. So that's all I'm going to say now.
Thanks, Mr. Kaufman. Mr. Strange?
Yes, my comment, one of the things that's difficult following up on Glenn's comment of what we're supposed to do is the fact that since we have Euclidean zoning, which basically we run into problems all the time from a planning perspective, is the fact that residential areas butt up against commercial zones. And as history changes in Rehoboth and things change, sometimes folks get very upset because when they moved here X amount of years ago, a commercial property wasn't as intensely used as it is in the future, and yet C1 zoning allows much greater heights than R1 and other forms of use. And we have a situation here where, and I still contend that it's not split zoning, it's separate zoning. And the historical use has not been particularly intense. How we get around the issue that Glenn raised, where we don't specifically ask the applicant to do something specifically, but yet they on their own accord come forth with something that makes it more amenable to blend in with the community as a whole for all the residents of Rehoboth. That's kind of a tough nut to crack, but we're sort of stuck with that because of Euclidean. If we had form zoning, that would improve things a bit, but it's by no means a panacea. So it's a tough situation.
Mr. Bryan has a comment, and then after Mr. Bryan goes, let's see if we're ready to go to the public comments, but go ahead, Mr. Bryan.
It's a follow-up an issue that Steve raised, Steve Kaufman. Mr. Hutt, wouldn't you have to consolidate these two parcels into one in order to build? Otherwise you're going to be running into setbacks from that division line between the two parcels. So would you not anticipate having to merge these two parcels into one if the rezoning goes through?
I actually think that your comment highlights the difficulty of this situation perfectly, Mr. Bryan. There are two parcels here. There's no merging that needs to occur. It is one parcel. It's going to be difficult for the building official and Mr. Mandalis to figure out if there aren't separate setbacks. You would get to some imaginary location on the property and the setback would change from R1 to C1. And that's the difficulty that exists here. These things don't need to be merged. It is one parcel and has been for the most of the known history of this property, probably better than half a century.
Well, thank you for pointing that out, because the survey just wasn't clear whether there was a division line along the boundary or the frame building wall. And that had me confused.
Sure. And one other point I wanted to clarify, just so that the record is clear, you had asked about parking previously, whether it was on the surface or under. It is both, actually. There were places that were on surface parking, and then the bottom floor basement floor of their involved 40-some parking places as well. So there was parking in both locations.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I see Mr. Ellison has his hand up and we want to give him an opportunity, please.
He's also muted.
Yeah, I just have to register a concern about moving ahead on this at a time when it appears from the mayor and commissioners meeting at the beginning of this week that we may be in store for some additional professional help and perspective on this. I think that, you know, there are other situations where we still have whichever kind of zoning you want to call it, whether it's split or whatever, where, you know, we could use that. I think some of this additional perspective from a real planner. Of course, we have Mike with us right here, but still, I think it would be good to have that additional guidance. So I'm not in favor of moving ahead aggressively and with this until we see what actually happens with regard to getting some professional help for the city.
Thanks, Mr. Ellison. We appreciate those comments. And if everyone agrees, I would like to go to the public comments and then we can come back to our deliberation phase. I see everybody saying yes. So Max, so of course we already have Mr. Hutt. You don't want to say anything else at this time, do you, Mr. Hutt, or do you?
I do not. Thank you for your questions and the time. And I think on your list, one of the names I think might be the next name on your list is Carlton Savage, the engineer who's helped with this. And unless he's joined us, he ended up not being able to join. So I doubt you'll hear from him.
Oh, very good. Thank you. So then, so the order will be Mr. Dewey, Mr. Evans, Mr. Shoreline, and then Ms. Srivastava. And Max, if we could bring in Mr. Dewey. And Mr. Dewey, I think you're unmuted.
I believe I am.
Okay.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Dewey. My partner and I reside at 105 Scarborough Avenue. Cumulatively, we have been here for about 36 years, initially on Philadelphia Street, quite near the Belmore property. And then we built a home on Scarborough Avenue and we faced the former Walls property. Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to speak regarding the proposal to change the zoning of an R1 lot located at 330 Rehoboth Avenue and fronting on State Road to all C1. There are a number of speakers scheduled, as well as a number of letters outlining specific citizen concerns. I will keep my remarks brief. There are 3 points that I would like you to carry away. First, buyers, residential and commercial, make buying decisions based on the city zoning map. This map constitutes a contract with citizens and must not be treated lightly by engaging in spot zoning. Homeowners have invested hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, after relying on city zoning information and maps, as well as assurances from city officials that zoning would not be changed. Second, you can't unring the bell. Approval of this request for spot zoning would set a dangerous and possibly binding legal precedent. There are multiple split zone properties abutting the R1 zone, specifically the Walls property and the Belmore. This could, and frankly likely will, lead to similar requests and the extension of the commercial zone into our quiet residential neighborhoods. Third, the comprehensive development plan is a legally binding document. This proposal is clearly in conflict with multiple sections of the CDP. The CDP is the foundational document regarding the shared vision for the development of the city and responsible growth. There is no place for spot zoning and further encroachment of the commercial zone into our threatened, unique, and fragile residential neighborhoods. The Planning Commission should do the responsible thing and deny the request to rezone this property. Thank you for this opportunity and for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Dewey. We appreciate your comments. I'm resetting, and next, could we bring in Mr. Evans, please?
Thank you, Mr. Dewey. You took 3 of mine off my list, but mine are all based pretty much off of what you said today. And I'm just going to take them one by one. Now, he blanks me out, but Mr. Dewey gets his camera on. It's okay. I don't mind. It's okay. I would say to start with, listen to Mr. Strange and listen to your attorney, please. And I keep hearing people waffling today. And the one thing I'll get off the top of the plate is anything promised to you today or even in writing today is only as good as today. If you were to recommend to mayor and commissioners to change the zoning, assume that it will be the maximum legal, as Mr. Strange said, building on that site at C1 and nothing less. Even if you never see it again, you may or may not. Number 2, I disagree with whoever said that this is all one parcel. Mr. Mandelis, do you know one single parcel that is in 2 different zones that's legal?
I'll respond if you want me to, Mr. Chair.
No, don't. I'll just put it this way. The parking lot during my tenure on Board of Adjustment has a variance on it for parking. That came to us, and I don't know if it was before Mr. Mandelis or after, because of people complaining. The only reason I remember this is that Mayor Cooper reminded me, and I remembered that I complained about the lights that they were going to put up, and we wanted to make sure that they didn't shine in the eyes of the people back in the multi-use area or in the adjacent properties. Regardless, it's been used as one parcel for these many years. And anything promised is just a promise. Now let me get to the ones I had. Homeowners and businesses have a right to make a reasonable return on their property. That's a given. But they do not have a right to make a maximum return on their property. These are things we take into consideration, at least in the Board of Adjustment, and I don't know how they're weighed in other courts. In other words, you don't get to max everything out necessarily, not necessarily. I also am still wondering, and when I started this, I believed that this was the wrong place to start this particular discussion because I was sure this was a new application, which I am now confirmed this is a new application. And so this request by Mr. Hutt on behalf of the people he works for should have gone back to mayor and commissioners for them to weigh in on whether or not they wanted planning commission to make a recommendation, which is the normal way this is done. I was very surprised that you were taking a bite of an apple, which was not a reconsideration or a continuation, but you're here now. And it still has to go to mayor and commissioners. Since Mr. Dewey took a lot of them, I'm looking on my side questions. And I really think that takes care of all of them. I thank you for your consideration, your time, your work on behalf of the city, but keep the big picture in mind. I've heard almost every one of you say what I believe every citizen believes, which is we believe that there is a binding agreement that we should have a large, if you're in R1 and C1, you've been thinking there can never be something enormous next to you. We know that it's possible, but rezoning changes that agreement. And an R1 lot in an adjacent property changing to C1 would make most people crazy. And I'm sure when it comes to mayor and commissioners, if it does, that at least a dozen neighbors will be vocal on some call. Thanks very much, guys. Good luck.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Okay, do we have Mr. Schulman waiting. I don't see anything associated with his name, so we can go on to Ms. Srivastava. You're unmuted now. Please go ahead.
This is Mr. Srivastava. Mrs.
Oh, Mr. Srivastava. Sorry,
Mrs.
my apologies.
Srivastava is with me too, so
Okay.
she might pipe in. We
Can-
have been
can-
residents.
Sorry, can I interrupt? Is it possible for you all to get a little bit closer to the microphone? I can barely hear you.
Can you hear me now?
It's a little bit better, yes.
I'm sorry about that. My wife and I have lived in the 600 block of Scarborough Village for the last 38 years. And that block happens to be the one closest to the property that's being considered for rezoning today. 2 years ago when this came up, as a representative of Building 6, I had sent a letter into the Planning Commission stating our problems and concerns about this being developed as a hotel. I have reason to believe that all of you, or most of you at least, have seen that letter. If not, I'll be happy to quickly go through some of the points I raised. Are you hearing me now?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, good. As I said, we have been living in Building 6, and as it happens, the ground elevation where we are is at least 6 feet lower than the elevation of the parking lot on this property that we're talking about. Putting a 4-story high structure, whether it's a hotel or any other kind of commercial use, would cause us to be sitting almost in a hole with everybody looking down on us. The next aspect is our decks are pointed in that direction, and that's the western direction from our side. Many of the owners of the units in 600 block sit on those decks to bask in the sunshine. A 4-story building would kill the sunshine that it gets. We have had concerns with drainage from this property since the beginning. We have taken some measures to improve the situation, but we still have problems sometimes. I feel like if this is allowed to develop, it's going to make the situation worse. We're concerned about noise being generated. We're concerned about trash being generated from a commercial use. We're concerned with everything else that might happen there that's going to impact us. I would also like to say, and I know you've discussed this, but I used to work with Public Works in Newcastle County. In my experience, even though a plan is recorded with the understanding that there will be some limitations on what will be allowed to be developed there, for example, even though the applicant is willing to say right now that it'll be a hotel just like they had in mind, once the property gets rezoned, it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to hold the owner to that. For all you know, it might change hands, the property might. And so I'm very concerned about the rezoning. In my opinion, a hotel application with appropriate variances made more sense than rezoning the entire property from that perspective. I'd also like to say that, when we bought our property in 1983, we knew that this particular area was zoned residential, and we figured that it would either stay the way it is, which is parking, and or there would be single-family homes being built there, which would be not so intrusive on us. Making this a commercial use would make it a lot worse. Maybe you want to add anything?
I would just like to reinforce that working with the community that surrounds the development is a very important aspect, regardless of what zoning is established. it would be very important that the developer work with the community that surrounds to make sure that the impact of whatever's being done is not unreasonable.
And I would also like to mention, if this was, for some reason, this application is going to go through, that appropriate measures be taken, protective measures for us in terms of sound and visual aspects and so on. I'm not sure what, I mean, a tall wall would not be very good, but something, and I'm not sure what it would be, but it would be a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. We appreciate hearing from you. So I don't think we have anyone else who wants to comment on this from the public. So why don't we move on to our discussion and deliberation phase? I don't know that we have that much to discuss. I think everyone has said they're uncomfortable with making a decision today. I'll just ask kind of in a straw vote way. Is anybody comfortable making a decision, yes or no, today? I don't see any takers. So this is where we are. So a lot of different things about what people would like have been discussed. So maybe we should go and see what Mr. Kaufman thinks next. I saw your hand.
Thanks, Jeff. First of all, I think it's been a very good discussion. And I was glad to hear from not only the applicant, but the adjacent landowners, the residential, that are in the residential areas, I guess primarily in the condominium. What I really think is I'd like the applicant to take these comments today seriously. And I would still like to see a project concept review, whether you keep it as a parking lot or you utilize the whole thing. But I'm most concerned about the buffers and protections that will be provided to protect the adjacent landowners. I haven't seen anything about that. All I've seen is a hotel and a parking lot. I haven't seen any steps taken to ameliorate noise or other types of impacts. That's the thing that concerns me the most. And I'd like the applicant, if they're willing, to take the time between now and the next time we look at this to address those things in a concept way. So that's all I'm going to say right now.
Thank you, Mr. Kaufman. While someone else decides if they want to raise their hand, I also think this has been an extremely beneficial conversation. And I'm glad we have gotten so much engagement over this issue. And obviously, we do have one section of commercial property which is going to be redeveloped and should be redeveloped. And we heard the reasons for that. We heard the reasons why we should and should not consider what's being built on there. But as Mr. Mandela said, our zoning things are broad, broad, broad. And there's a whole bunch of things in C1 that I would never want to see put on that lot. So it's difficult to get to yes, and it's difficult to use the religious purity method that we should consider the zoning without any context of what's going to be built. So I feel very comfortable with some process that takes us as a next step, sketch plan review. And I'm going to be so bold, I hope I don't regret this, but I'm going to be so bold is to point out a couple of things. One, I pointed out in my comments, the Board of Commissioners has seen fit to make sure that underground parking is an amenity that is available in the commercial district without FAR penalty. Okay, I've heard nothing except parking for the 2.5 years I've been on the Planning Commission. And that lot that is nearly an acre has great potential to be a number of things that would be community amenities above and beyond a hotel. I also think that a property so close or to be included in the commercial core best use may not be as a large surface parking lot. Of course, a hotel needs some surface parking, but you know, we're living outdoors. The pandemic changed things. Outdoor areas, a garden area, there's lots of things that could be considered. And while I'm not an architect, you know, Mr. Ellison maybe will make some comments, but I think conceptually, if this is C1 zoning, what would a completely different concept that respected all the residences around it? Not necessarily preserve the parking lot, but respected all the residential around it and blended in across two streets, Rehoboth Avenue and State Road, you know, could perhaps have multiple uses and really function great in a way that would be superb for the hotel in the neighborhood. So I guess that's why I'm hooked on this sketch plan, because I think we can do better than what we've seen. I understand why we saw that plan when we had to straddle the two things, but if it was C1, what's the best thing we could see? That's what I would really like to see. Anyone else? Mr. Strange?
Yeah, I agree completely with you, Jeff. And I think it's a very good observation, because when this original application was made, the FAR was a very different situation back then. And this has been a dramatic change when the commissioners voted, thank God, to do that based on our recommendation, because it is critical to the zoning. But I'd like to ask Glenn, one of the things I'm somewhat confused. They have made a submission to us. And so we either need to we deserve, or the applicant deserves to have it voted on, I think. But the question is, what would we vote on? And the other thing is, based on what we're saying, is it more appropriate if the applicant wishes to withdraw their application? I don't know what the best path is for everyone concerned, I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, so I think there's options there that perhaps the applicant can weigh in on it, but I do think that, you know, ultimately what you'll be voting on is a recommendation to the city commissioners as to whether to zone the property C1 or leave it as it currently is. I don't think it's inappropriate to ask for a concept plan as part of this process, reviewing and trying to get to determination as to what your recommendation will be. You know, subject to the comments I made earlier, but I don't think it's inappropriate, and that can be part of your process of getting to a recommendation on the zoning question, which you're right, that's the question that the applicant has asked. Will you make a recommendation to approve or not approve? So ultimately, that's what you should be voting on at some point.
Okay, thank you. I was going to say, from that standpoint, talking generally at the moment, I personally would, if it comes to that, would propose that we reject the current proposal without malice. And then as a separate issue, request of the applicant to reconsider in light of the new FAR regulations and in light of what Jeff just said, of what the potentials could be to preserve the community character if in fact we proceed and rezone it from R to C1.
I think I saw a hand from Mr. Bryan.
My only question is whether, follow up with what Glenn just said, whether it would be appropriate simply to move that we defer consideration of this until the next meeting.
I agree with that.
So do I.
And Mr. Weber?
Yeah, it seems to me that we have a threshold issue, which is if we can even legally have a condition attached to a zoning. I don't think anyone here is going to just blindly approve a rezone. I took a minute to look at the things that are allowed in C1, and it's anything from a hotel to a restaurant to a pool hall to a miniature golf course to a funeral parlor. I mean, there's just a million different things that could go on there. So I don't think any of us, I can't speak for everybody, but I don't think this would be comfortable just recommending approval that it get rezoned without having a specific plan that's somehow legally tied to the zoning. But if that can't be legally done, then, waiting till next month or whenever to review that sketch plan is kind of moot. Because then it would just be a wish and a promise that that's what they're going to build on there.
So, Mr. Kaufman, go ahead, and then Mr. Covington.
Well, I don't think we can condition it on a specific project. I think you can't do conditional zoning. But there's nothing wrong with having a project concept for us to look at in the form of a proffer, which they've already done. But I think what we're asking them to do is take a look at that in light of the recent changes to the FAR issues and the other things that we've brought up today regarding what amenities and buffers can be provided to the surrounding residential neighborhood. That wouldn't be conditional zoning, and yes, they could change, but it certainly would give us a lot more to work with if we defer this and go on to our next July meeting. And the other thing is we would need to agree to waive the 28 days to allow the applicant to come in with that plan, because that is a requirement in the current zone.
And Mr. Covington.
Yes, we have a real problem here with this unique piece of property, and maybe Glenn or some of the other land use attorneys can address it, but I'm having a hard time understanding with the two zones. If you build, let's say that they were to build a hotel on the C1 zone, and they decided to put, is it possible to put residential on the R1? Even though you have one large parcel, you're having two different buildings. Legally, can that be done? And secondly, is it marketable? Would it be marketable to put a residential home on State Street next to a big hotel? I mean, is it even saleable? I mean, marketable for someone to do that? And I think that we've got to address the issue and figure out, it's got to change some point in time. I think, so I don't know what the answer is. I don't know legally what can be done, but I think we have a problem here. We should try to address it.
So, Mr. Bryan, do you want to say something else?
Just to follow up, and I know I've asked this question before, but sometimes it takes a while for things to sink in for me. But Glenn, is it permissible for the applicant to agree to offer or proffer to do certain things with the property and have that incorporated into the terms of a rezoning? We're not dictating what they do, but if they voluntarily say, oh, we won't build a gas station, or we won't build a funeral home, or we will observe certain setbacks or whatever, is that permissible?
Permissible, but you want to have it in some form that is going to be binding. They can offer things, but, and I'm not saying that Mr. Hutter is fine would do anything that, or offer anything that they wouldn't follow through with, but typically it comes in the form of a deed restriction that they present to you, a draft deed that incorporates a deed restriction that would not allow a certain use on that property. There's other mechanisms as well. I mean, sometimes it's issues of easements that you need to see on the property. So there's other mechanisms to do it, but yes, there are ways that they can make a proffer where you're not conditioning it, your zoning decision, but there are legal mechanisms that they put in place that give you assurances that the use that they have proposed is the use they're going to go through with.
Okay, well, I promise I won't ask that question a third time.
Mr. Kaufman, do you want to say something? And then I want to figure out if we can formulate a motion.
Okay. I wanted to address Mr. Covington's question.
Right.
From a land use perspective. The property that's zoned residential could be developed separately as a residential use. I don't know about the R1 zone, whether it permits apartments, for example, other than single family attached or detached houses. But assuming you could, it certainly wouldn't be inappropriate to have an apartment on that property many main streets have apartments that are adjacent to it. I don't know whether that's permitted in the R1 zone or not. I haven't looked at it. But you could definitely develop it residentially with a hotel next to it. You'd have to meet the code, all the setbacks, and based upon the FAR that would be in each project, you'd have to have a project plan approved by the Planning Commission. And I agree with Mike. I think there is definitely a way in which if the applicant chooses to come back and give us a sketch plan and a proffer, that legally it could be provided, that it does not violate conditional zoning at all. The whole idea about conditional zoning is it's not comprehensive in nature. We do have a concept, we do have a citywide plan, which anticipated that there would be commercial development in this general area, the current CDP, and I'm pretty sure, we'll have some additional things that address that sort of thing in the new CDP. So I think the main thing is that I want to give the applicant time to digest all of this and figure out where they want to go. And I respect the fact that, they have those options. The only other thing I would say is, I don't know if Mr. Ellison is still on the Board of Adjustments, but if he is, and this comes up to them, he may have to recuse himself based upon his comments today. So
I think you meant Mr. Evans, Mr. Kaufman.
Oh, Mr. Evans, yeah.
He is not.
That's just a comment. That's it, I'm done.
Okay, so I have to do Ms. Womack's job. We do have to end at 4:30. So we need a path forward. And I think I've heard more than one person say that they're interested in a motion that would say that we don't have enough information to make a recommendation at this time. But I'm not trying to put words in anyone's mouth. But I think there's another movement out there that says we continue this. My personal view is that this has been tremendously beneficial, and I feel like the community, everybody, and the applicant has benefited by this discussion a lot to understand all the issues that are involved. And as Mr. Hutt said, it's going to be very complicated, and it clearly is. So I wonder if we want to end this phase and perhaps start with outreach and start something fresh with the applicant. And I welcome any of your comments about that.
Well, I liked Mr. Kaufman's idea of postponing it to our next meeting, waiving the 28 days, giving the applicant an opportunity to come back with their thoughts on how they would like to present or develop this piece of property, and use that as a framework to either recommend or not recommend a rezoning.
I second that.
Okay, so we'll take that as a motion and a second. Does anyone want to make a comment about that? Go ahead.
Just one, Jeff, and actually the applicant, is the applicant interested in doing what we're saying we'd like them to do? Or would they like to propose something different?
I'm okay with hearing that.
Hold on, sorry, I was unmuting the microphone. Certainly, as Mr. Trunzo has indicated and the Planning Commission members have indicated, there's been a lot of useful information shared today. And so certainly I need to discuss with my clients, how to best respond to what we've heard this afternoon from the members of the Planning Commission, as well as the members of the public, both the comments that we heard this afternoon, as well as the written comments that were embedded in the agenda. So certainly we would take up the Planning Commission on the offer of looking further into this and presenting something again.
Okay.
It does not sound like the 28-day is such an urgency thing at this point in time. Am I assuming too much?
Is that directed to me, Mr. Trunzo?
I'm sorry, I should have said that. Yes, Mr. Hutt. It doesn't seem, it sounds like there's I mean, I think there's a lot to digest. So, I mean, you may or may not wish to come back in June. You may possibly need more time. Or as Mr. Kaufman said, we don't need to necessarily deal with making a promise that you'll be back in June, other than you'll be back in the future.
We need to get.
I think we'll be back as quickly as we possibly can, due to the litigation and then COVID and such. That this has again, not pointing or casting aspersions, but this process has taken some time. So I think that we'll be back fairly quickly, and my clients are motivated to move forward as quickly as possible. I think the real question is, we have to answer some questions here and then see what other professionals might need to be involved. That's the only time constraint that I think we would have. But Ms. Gallo has said to me a couple times that they would want to be on the next agenda so that this continues to move forward. And again, the only thing that would slow that down is if there needs to be some other professional involved who's not available at that time.
Sure, very good. I think that satisfies it. So back to our discussion. We have a motion which has been seconded to continue this, and the details to come. Is that clear enough for everybody?
Yeah. So okay. Call the question. Call the question then.
So all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? I'm going to vote against that. And any abstentions? None. Okay, so that motion carried. We will continue with this process as outlined into the future, and I will work with the applicant and involve other folks like Mr. Mandelis as necessary to get the materials that we need for the next session. Thanks. Okay. So the next item I have on the agenda is general citizen comments, and that was meant for anyone who wants to comment on the CDP, our other agenda item. So I will.
Jeff.
I'm sorry.
Could we possibly take a little break?
But we have to end in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all right. Okay.
Sorry.
I guess I gotta wait.
Okay. Or you can turn off your camera and leave for a moment. It's okay.
It's all right. It's not that important.
Okay, so for the general citizen comments, Mr. Dewey, Mr. Evans, or Mr. or Mrs. Srivastava, do you want to comment on anything else that was on the agenda? Mr. Dewey?
I would like to offer a brief comment, or perhaps better phrased as a question, not necessarily for an answer this afternoon, but I would be very interested in more information in the future. A great worry for me as an individual property owners, as well as for those of us who live in this neighborhood abutting the Belmore and the former Walls property. From a legal perspective, perhaps this is answered by members of the Planning Commission, perhaps by other attorneys working for the city. What are the downside risks to our neighborhoods should the Planning Commission eventually agree to rezone this property in whole to C1?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dewey. Mr. Evans. Anything else, Mr. Evans? Okay, hearing nothing from Mr. Evans. And the Srivastavas, anything else to say? You're unmuted now.
No, thank you. No.
Nothing else? Okay, thank you so much. So let's get into the other business. So I had a list of items that are updates from the chair. I've really covered everything that I listed here in my update to the Planning Commission of a week or so ago. So I would like to maybe jump to City Solicitor comments and ask Mr. Mandelis if he can say anything about Clear Space Rehoboth Spotlight at this point in time. There's a lot of community questions about that and the Planning Commission's role going forward.
Sure. So where we sit with the Clear Space Rehoboth Spotlight appeal, as you all know, that it has been appealed and there is a hearing date set. However, the appellants have a pending continuance request based upon just recently obtaining legal counsel, additional legal counsel. As it currently sits, the city commissioners are going to convene on May 19th to consider the continuance request, and they'll make a decision at that point whether they're going to continue the hearing to some later date. If they do not, the current schedule is that on May 24th, the first round of submissions by the parties are due to the city commissioners. On June 7th, the second round of submissions are due. And then on June 14 is the actual hearing date to decide the appeal. There's been some deviations to that schedule that the parties have talked about. Nobody has agreed upon it yet. The city commissioners have said if the parties come to an agreement, they will honor that agreement as to when the submissions are due. Obviously, the meeting minutes that are deferred now for you all to consider until this coming Tuesday are going to be relevant and helpful to making those first round of written submissions that we have to put in. But I think the most important date coming up is May 19, because the commissioners will decide whether to stick with the current schedule they have or do something different. But as it currently sits, we are set for a hearing on June 14.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Oh, go ahead.
I should mention as well that under our city code, there can only be two appeals. The city commissioners can only remand the application one time, which they've already done, and it's now back before the city commissioners. They don't have the option this time to remand it to the Planning Commission. So they have to vote to either affirm your decision or reject it.
Thank you. Mr. Strange, you have a question?
Yeah, Glenn, is Beach Walk heating up again?
Beach Walk is not heating up again.
Okay.
It has been quiet now for some time. I shouldn't say it's not heating up. You know, Max Walton is representing the city in that case. Richard Forston, who interestingly, who represents the Beach Walk applicant, is also representing now the Clear Space individuals. So I know that Max and Rich have had some exchange of discovery, which is written interrogatories and documents going back and forth, but nothing. There's no dates right around the corner of anything relevant.
Okay, good.
Great, thank you for that. I'm also going to jump to future Planning Commission agenda items. Ms. Womack let me know today that a submission for a lot merger and partitioning of lots 63, 65, and 67 Lake Avenue have been submitted in a timely manner. So we can expect to hear more about that shortly. With that, we have 3 minutes left. Is there anything that we need to discuss other than, please make yourself available next Tuesday so we can take care of those very important meeting minutes. Mr. Ellison, go ahead. You're muted, sir.
He's muted.
Jeff, you kind of ran past the city planner item.
Yes.
And I think we all probably saw what happened at the commissioner mayor meeting on Monday. And I think that it's imperative that you representing the commission and Mike Strange, because of his obvious special capabilities and experience in this field, really should be on top of this and invited to be on top of it right now. As I read what the mayor said at the end of the meeting, he's tossed it back to the city manager. And although she's, very nice, doing a good job generally, I think this is so special and so important to the work of this commission that the two of you ought to be on top of this and involved in every manner of the process forward.
Thank you for those comments. And for anybody who's watched the tape of the Board of Commissioner meetings, my name was invoked many times because I have been doing almost nothing but evangelizing for this issue since last year. And I was very, very happy to see the universal acceptance of it. And I've had many discussions with the city manager, so she's very well versed, and she knows the urgency of the matter. And this is, I do not intend to have a repeat of the matter which Mr. McAllis just talked about, where I cannot wear two hats. I can't be the city planner and the chair of the planning commission. It gets really, really messy at some point in time. That someone at the city has to own that role and has to tell us what are the good things, the bad things, and the possible unintended consequences of a big commercial redevelopment. We can do it as a group, but it might take us months to get there. We need a professional helping us with that. So I think we're all on the same page, and I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, the city got my input as a citizen, not as a member of the planning commission.
Agreed. Mr. Kaufman?
Yeah, I wanted to apologize to Mr. Ellison for confusing him with Mr. Evans. And I know you're not on the Board of Adjustments, and I want to welcome you and look forward to working with you.
Enough assignment.
And you can make your apologies, Mr. Kaufman, by making a motion to adjourn.
Let's not do a motion to adjourn. So it should be a motion to recess or a motion to recess and then reconvene on Tuesday, May 18 at 10 a.m.
So moved.
Seconded.
Seconded. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everybody. I know this was a tough one. I appreciate your patience and input.